Genuinely, I mean...
Really? There's already enough time. I was listening to poor old Nigel with his knife, you know. If only he knew the hoops you had to jump through to get that beast.
I mean, it is laughable about something so serious. And these sort of... And then,
yes.
You know, Yvette Cooper was like, oh, this is disgrace. It's like, this isn't the issue.
It's not the issue. And yet, for some reason...
Someone 9 days before their 18th birthday buying a knife is not the problem here.
I was talking to an Iranian taxi driver yesterday. You might expect it in Iran. He was telling me the kind of sentences you would get in Iran if you were caught just carrying a knife.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
Maybe the mullahs aren't wrong about everything.
A little bit of that.
Ian Collins up next. Big thanks to Claire Pearson. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Don't seem to be we do now have contact. I think we for a moment there had no audio. You can see why that might be a problem in this genre of talk radio. But we're back. Welcome to the home of common sense. I think somebody's been monkeying around with buttons. What have we got today? It's busy, I can tell you that much. It is busy, a lot to get into. You guys never let us down when it comes to response to the big stories of the day. New age verification rules for almost, if this wasn't so serious, I would be laughing as I was saying this. New age verification rules for online knife sales will be introduced after the Southport stabbings. This is the genius stroke from Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, calling it a disgrace that the attacker in Southport could buy a knife on Amazon. Yeah, he could also have got one out of his mum's kitchen as well, for that matter. Ain't going to solve the problem, Yvette Cooper. Details on the way. Yesterday we told you about the British driving licence going digital. Today the British passport will be made available on smartphones from 2027, stored in a new government digital wallet. Are you quivering yet? People can save documents there to their phone using a government app. Are you buying into the easy, carefree way of the new digital world? We'll have more on that. And convicted benefit cheats could face being banned from driving as part of the plan to crack down on fraud. Yes, the kind of people that might be defrauding the benefit system probably haven't got a driving licence and wouldn't give a hoot whether they were collared driving or not. Details to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. I'd kind of forgotten until I was just talking to Julia then about the conversation I had with an Iranian taxi driver 2 days ago. We were talking about this, and he was saying that if you are caught, and he went through a sort of detailed kind of spectrum of sentences that are handed out specifically on the issue of knife crime. But he said if you were caught with a knife and you were in a situation that looked as if you were about to be confrontational with the knife, then you would be looking at about 20 years in jail. So with that in mind, how does that sit with Yvette Cooper's great new plan to have a two-step verification on the Amazon? People trying to buy knives online will face tougher measures to prove their age under new restrictions being brought forward in the wake of the Southport attacks. We know, of course, that Axel Rudakabana has admitted to murdering 3 girls. He will be sentenced tomorrow. A knife purchased on Amazon when he was just 17. Despite existing laws which prohibit the sale of most knives to under 18s, online retailers will be forced to ask anyone buying a knife for 2 types of ID under government plans, with buyers asked to submit an identity document like a passport and record a live video to prove their age. Yeah. I don't know where to begin in identifying the multifarious flaws in this half-baked, frankly stupid idea. There is already a verification in most reasonable places. There are some outlets, I think John Lewis, you can't buy a knife online. On Amazon, you've got to show ID when the bloke turns up to deliver it. I don't know how much is attached to that. But of course, the bottom line, regardless of what you... I mean, really? Is anybody who's intent on murder really going to struggle to get hold of a knife? Is that going to be the flaw in their murderous plans when they worked out who they wanted to kill and what they wanted to do, or the deeds they wanted to carry out with a blade? Are they going to suddenly go at the end of it? They'd mapped out their entire criminal murderous journey and they suddenly go, oh, I haven't got a knife. Oh, I'll cancel what I'm about to do. That ain't going to go anywhere. Tougher sentences will not always be the answer. I'm kind of forced to imagine that the person responsible for Southport, I don't want to keep name-checking this man, I don't imagine whether he and many others actually cared if they were caught. In those kind of crimes, the perpetrator is so often easily caught. So that's one of the irredeemable realities about this. People are either relaxed about getting caught, they're not bothered, they're so messed up, their world is so screwed in so many different ways that getting collared by the old bill isn't really the issue. Go to prison, fine, I don't care. Or they're people who genuinely don't believe they will get caught. If you look at most teen murders, and a lot of knife crime is teen on teen, and it's mostly young boys that are affected in, not exclusively. If you look at those kind of stories, again, they're often solved very quickly, often occurring in broad daylight as well. We've been hearing just today of a 12-year-old boy fatally stabbed in Birmingham. A 14-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of murder. Can't say too much about it as a result of that. But a 12-year-old kid stabbed in broad daylight. We know, of course, of the story of Kellyanne Bokassa, stabbed to death on a bus in Woolwich. These are all recent incidents. We know that the case of Eliane Andam, who was stabbed, a 15-year-old was stabbed, the perpetrator found guilty of murder just a week or so ago. These things are happening all the time. What is the solution to knife crime? Now, I think the starting point is that teens in particular are fully aware, somewhere in their subconscious mind, they might be thinking, I've got some bravado here, I'm not going to get caught. The idea of being the kind of tough gang member kind of trumps and usurps any sort of logic or handbrake that most people would have. But in addition to that, I think some of these kids are painfully aware that if they are caught carrying a knife, nothing is going to happen. And it never does. I don't know how many times I can come to the table, come to the microphone and make the same point. I've interviewed almost every Home Secretary since Jack Straw, and some of the others that went before him, by the way. And every one of them has made the point, we're going to get tough on knife crime. Every single time, we're going to get tough on knife crime. Nobody ever got tough on knife crime. Nobody ever said, if you are caught carrying a blade in the street, we're going to have mass stop and search. It will be random. You will not know whether your town or postcode is selected for stop and search on this particular. You will have no idea. But we're going to descend on areas. The intel tells us there's kids out there that are doing some bad stuff. We know that knives are a big issue. We're going to turn up. And if you are caught carrying a blade, you are going to jail for 5 years based on just carrying the blade. And remember, these kids are not carrying around a Stanley knife. They're carrying around flipping machetes and those other kind of zombie knives, all manner of the sort of thing that looks like something out of Game of Thrones. I mean, these are horrendous weapons. And they do this without caring. They're often caught on CCTV walking around, waving these damn things. So until we get serious on the penalties for carrying them, I honestly think, and I don't think this would apply to Southport, sadly. I don't know what the answer is to Southport, and I'm tempted, and I hate saying this, tempted to think that there is no answer to a mad person going violently berserk in the street, in this case in a kid's holiday club, or anywhere else for that matter. I don't know if any sort of legislation is likely to make much of a difference for those kind of crimes, but I am absolutely sure that having a message that you could be stopped and the penalty just for carrying the damn thing is going to be extensive, and it's going to be 5 years. I honestly believe the proliferation of people carrying these things is in part because there are no consequences for carrying it. There's no taboo in carrying it. There's only kudos among your friends. 0344 499 1000. What is the solution? Let's get a word with, on this story and a few of the other big stories of the day as well. Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, is with us. Isabel, good afternoon to you.
Hi, I mean, I agree with everything you've said there, and I actually couldn't believe it when I heard Yvette Cooper thinks that the solution or an appropriate response to this absolute horror in Southport is to come up with some more verification process for buying knives. Yes. I mean, how fatuous is that? You're right that actually, having tried not that long ago to order a new set of kitchen knives for my own house a couple of months ago, it is actually a real pain. You know, they won't just deliver them willy-nilly. You've got to have an adult there to sign for it, blah, blah, blah. And the same in any supermarket. If you try to buy a knife, it's usually, you know, it's covered up with one of those special locking systems, and they do check that it's, you know, you're a certain age. But the reality is, as you said, unless anyone intent on murderous rampage somehow has no access to any house in the country from which they can just pluck a knife from a drawer, they're always going to be able to find that weapon, aren't they? I think 100%. What you say is a complete radical change in culture, zero tolerance, absolutely zero tolerance to any form of knife carrying. And it's really just part of a much wider thing, which is that there is way insufficient fear on the part of people who are involved in the wrong side of life, whether it's drug dealing or petty crime or whatever it may be, of any form of retribution. They basically just think, well, let's shrug, let's see, I'll probably get away with it, which of course is not what Axel Ruda-Cabana would have been thinking. We are talking about a complete nut job here who wasn't thinking logically in that manner in the first place.
And it's interesting that there's no, it's not taboo carrying a knife, of course, for some of these kids. It's pretty standard de rigueur to walk around with a massive blade in the side of your trousers. Nobody cares, and you're kind of given house points among your peers for doing so. And I can only believe, Isabel, that part and parcel of that has been allowed, that sense of entitlement to carry a blade is partly because of the inept system that we have when it comes to how people are punished. And we now know that, you know, many people out there, that many of these kids that are caught carrying them, face no penalty at all, bar a bit of a police caution.
Well, this government set completely the wrong tone right at the very beginning of the administration by literally releasing a load of prisoners. What message does that send out about your attitude to law and order, about how you intend to govern in the years ahead, about whether or not you are really, really serious about making sure that people are convicted of doing awful things are properly punished? It sent no such message whatsoever. It was basically a mass throwing up of the hands, a despairing cry of, well, our prisons are overflowing and we've got more people who need to be sent to prison, so let's just let out the ones that are already in there. Sure. You couldn't make it up, could you? It's
extraordinary. And the more this goes on, I mean, we all kind of wondered whether this government was going to be a little bit rubbish beforehand. Never in my wildest dreams,
if only that were all it was.
Indeed, never in my wildest dreams did I think it was going to be this bad. And the more I see it kind of play out, the idea of these people, I think their politics, their kind of political ideology, which underpins all that they are doing at the moment, doesn't allow them to see some of these problems. They see perpetrators also as victims, and it's within their DNA to analyse and conclude in this kind of bizarre manner. You know, we've got to understand what's going on in this. Sometimes you've got to get tough. Sometimes you've got to say there are bad people out there. They won't ever say that. What the best we get is an age verification. I'd like to see Home Secretary Cooper stand up and deliver us, but in the same way that you imagine what Donald Trump would say on knife crime. I mean, you don't have to be a massive Trump fan or supporter to see just the difference between how two governments are functioning.
And I think this is going to become, and as I've said before on Talk, an increasing problem for this government. It's not that everyone in the UK looks at Donald Trump and thinks he's a great hero, but what they do see is someone who's very sure what he's about and isn't afraid to use every power at his disposal to, as he puts it, fix the wrongs that he sees. And we don't see any such thing from this government. We just see kind of robotic prime ministerial statements. Honestly, the guy could just about as well be a wooden chair as a prime minister for all the life that he exudes. And people just yearn for something with more vibrancy about it, something with more inner conviction, someone who we feel as if they get it. They understand the despair of voters as they witness our country diminishing, and somebody who is as determined as Trump to turn things around.
Well, don't worry, Isabel, because all of our problems are soon going to be solved with digital ID. And that's going to put a stop to everything, because we'll have all of our bits and pieces into a smartphone. The British passport. Yesterday we talked about the British driving licence coming later this year into your smartphone. We now know the British passport by 2027 as part of a new government wallet where you can save your documents using this special government app. Let's have a little listen to an ad that was released just before Christmas, this by the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology on the issue of digital ID.
I know it's a surprise for everyone, but I don't get asked for my ID anymore. But for loads of young people, they get asked all the time when they want to buy a drink. So we're changing the law so that next Christmas, young people will have their ID on their phone, so they won't have all of the hassle of needing to get ID or leaving their ID at home, or their paper ID getting lost or damaged.
Get in the bin, mate. I don't know who he was, but it was probably a £5,000 corporate gig, I'm guessing, Isabel. And there it is. Digital ID. It's the solution to everything.
Well, you know, I might have a different perspective to you on this. I'm currently in the Middle East, in a country where ID is needed for absolutely everything. And you have to show your ID if you've got a meeting in a building. You have to show your ID if you buy alcohol. You have to show your ID if you want to buy a mobile phone. And I'm honestly fine about it, because it also acts as a protection for anyone involved in any transaction. So, for example, if you are required to send money, a deposit for something, you get the ID of the other party, and you know that if they're actually some scam artist, they won't give you their ID, and then you won't be able to pursue them. So I've changed my view on this. I completely understand the libertarian arguments, Big Brother is watching everything you do and so on. But we are in a position in our country, in the UK, where we have millions of people who have come in without the right documentation. They're not entitled to be claiming for things they're claiming for. We have uncontrolled immigration, thousands coming across the channel. I think ID may have actually reached a moment where it is justified. And actually, perhaps if we had a wide debate on this, you would find that more people are in favour of it than would have been some years ago.
Do you know what? I wouldn't have a problem with my driving licence. I love, if I can cut down on paperwork. I hate all of, I subscribe to that stuff like there's no tomorrow. I think the problem occurs if that digital ID then begins to contain your vaccination status or something like that. That's where it starts to get maybe questionable.
So I think health is in a sort of separate category, isn't it? And that should probably always be voluntary. Although, again, you can make a powerful case that most people with any common sense would be quite glad to have their blood group or any other kind of critical medical information about them. Just the essential stuff on a card that they could just show, whether it's at A&E or someone can pick it out your bag and if it's an emergency situation. Because I'm afraid the reality is, when you are taken to A&E in a desperate situation, it cannot be guaranteed that the doctors, nurses and other healthcare professionals there can just tap your name into a computer and get access to your records. People time and again in no condition to give their medical histories or tell emergency staff what they're on, what drugs they're taking and so on, are being asked to recite their own medical details, and then they're in the middle of a heart attack.
Yeah, no, I think on that, when you put it like that, it makes perfect sense. But we know where we've been or nearly went in the past, and I think that's the area that will clearly and understandably concern some people. Isabel, stay with us. Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, is with us, chewing the fat on the big stories of the day. Still to come, we'll talk about benefits. Benefit cheats could be banned from the road. Ooh, that'll scare people. And Trump and Vance ambushed by a bishop. What the hell's that all about? Find out more coming next on Talk.
Lord Carlisle was removed from the independent review of Prevent back in 2019 because of concerns over his impartiality. Interestingly, he does rather seem to have changed his tune.
Does he?
Since last September, when he said, I think we should get out more information if we possibly can. We've learned from these events, when someone is arrested, the police probably need to tell the media who's been arrested and what their background is. So perhaps Lord Carlisle should come back on the programme and explain why he's changed his tune.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
We'll go to your calls shortly. We're talking knife crime as well. What is the solution? The government have come up with a woeful set of... They're not even proposals. They don't mean anything at all, frankly. Certainly don't go to the root of solving the problem. Details to come on that and your responses as well. Isabel Oakeshott is with us, Talk's international editor, joining us live. And this story as well, Isabel. Benefit cheats face being banned from driving for 2 years under proposed new anti-fraud laws. People who owe more than £1,000 in wrongly claimed welfare payments and have ignored repeated requests to return the money could be punished under new proposed changes. Let's have a listen to a clip from Fraser Nelson's documentary on Britain's benefit problems.
So you're working part-time now and you're getting long-term sickness benefits. So what's the combination of those two compared to when you were working full-time with no benefits?
It's no different. So I'm probably working half the hours for the same money.
Right. So there's no financial incentive for you to get out of a situation at all?
None at all. None at all.
So why are you here? Why are you talking to me?
Because I want to highlight how bad things are.
Well, I mean, fair play, Isabel, for the man there highlighting how bad things are. He hasn't been banned from driving, and this is another great government initiative where apparently telling you you're not allowed to get on four wheels might well be the answer to the problem.
Look, I'll take any answers to the problem at this point. I mean, if telling people they can't drive if they commit benefit fraud makes a difference, then I'm all ears. I see this as one of the biggest, if not the biggest problem facing our country. The reason that the government is so strapped for cash and keeps having to ask people who work for more in tax is because we've got far too many people who are not incentivized to work. And you know, it's human nature in some ways to do as little as possible. If you're going to get handouts and you don't actually have to do anything in return, well, you know, I can kind of understand why some people might prefer to have a life of leisure, albeit no one's saying they get to live high on the hog, but, you know, they can still have a perfectly decent existence. And there is so much industrial scale abuse of the system that it's almost hard to know where to begin. You need a Trump-like approach to this, where you just say, you know what, for example, I'm just scrapping the entire, for example, Motability scheme. I'm going to start again. I'm going to narrow it down to, you know, a small number of people who genuinely have a powerful case for taxpayer-funded, subsidised driving, for example. We just mentioned that just because we're talking about banning people from driving. And the Motability scheme, I think, is a enormous scandal. So much so, by the way, when I tweeted about this recently, I was contacted by a number of people who used to benefit from the Motability scheme as dealers, car dealers. And they said, you know what, there's more than one person contacted me about this, said, do you know what, I pulled out of the Motability scheme because I could see that it was being royally abused and I could not in all conscience continue to take money for providing these vehicles. So I'm not saying that some people don't need them or deserve them or whatever, but it's just one example. We have a massive problem of benefits abuse in our country, And whatever it takes, it needs to be done.
Well, you're right. I mean, the car thing is extraordinary. My sister used to live next door to a guy who was, he got one of those free cars. Our suspicions were first aroused when he completed the London Marathon, and we thought, hang on, that's a bit strange. Poor old bad back Bob seems to be doing rather well. Eventually, events caught up with him and the car disappeared. Let's move on to this story. Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance were urged by a bishop to have mercy on trans children and immigrants during an inauguration church service. Let's have a listen to what Bishop Marion Edgar Bude had to say.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families. Some who fear for their lives.
Well, it was powerful stuff, and many, Isabel, on all sides of the political arena have said, well, that's kind of her job to do that. Is there anything wrong with what she said? And how do you think it would have penetrated the thoughts of Donald Trump?
Well, I love looking at the expressions. I mean, if that was supposed to be a prayer, I mean, you're generally supposed to keep your eyes shut during a prayer, but those lot were just
wide open.
Going, oh, wow, what is this? Look, I mean, men and women of the cloth, it's their duty, I suppose, to be as big-hearted and generous as anything. But I mean, had I been sitting in that audience, I would have had to have restrained myself, that congregation, from, snorting with derision. The idea that trans children fear for their lives as a result of this change of administration. Perhaps the best thing we could do to protect so-called trans children is not to fill their heads with all this confusion about gender identity in the first place. And that's what Donald Trump said in that amazing speech he gave following the inauguration. He was very clear, there are only two biological sexes, men and women. And in my view, and in view of many people in America and indeed the UK, the best way we can protect children from being unhappy is not to fill their heads with ideas that there might be, 25 different other genders.
Yeah, telling 5- and 6-year-olds, and we know it does go that young, that they could be any one of 25 or even 125 different genders out there. And you can be who you want to be. You can be a different gender on a different... I mean, the levels of confusion and frankly, abuse that is involved in all of that is off the scale. So we'll sit and see what happens. I don't imagine Trump's policy or beliefs are going to change, despite whatever intentions came from the bishop. Finally, this one, the top children's slang words of the year have been revealed. But what do they mean? I mean, that's the big question. And where do they come from? Let's see if you recognise this one.
What the heck is going on you?
Now, the first thing to say, Isabel, before we explore the meat of this story, is that clip came from a YouTube channel where animated faces in urinals gets them 45 million subscribers. It's worth a fortune. Someone's clearly watching that old guff. Skibbity was the word there. Any idea what it means, Isabel?
Gotta confess, I'm not up on Skibbity. I do have 3 sort of young teenage children, not heard that one from them yet. Heard plenty of other bewildering phrases, but not that one.
Apparently, that was the 3rd most popular slang term for kids. It emerged from that viral video. The word lacks clear meaning, used by 15% of children in a survey to describe something unusual or extraordinary. Skibbity. So when you hear Yvette Cooper give a speech or David Lammy walk off an aeroplane, skibbity is the correct response. Sigma came second, a word that is bandied around my house every 3rd sentence at the moment. Don't really know what Sigma means. Slay is another big one, reflecting trends from LGBT culture and social media. And the list goes on. I mean, I guess we could say, well, it's always been a bit like this, isn't it? We've all had strange words as kids that our parents don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to get, I'm so out of touch with all of this. And there's a whole other lexicon you need for understanding their WhatsApp messages or Snapchat, if that's what they've got. I mean, for example, IKR, do you know what that stands for?
RKR.
No, IKR.
Oh, IKR. No.
Yeah, that's just I know, right? I know,
Oh,
right?
right. I know, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, all of this is like a daily challenge. I need a translation app, just what is it they're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Second mention of my sister, actually, here, by the way, who's older than me, by the way, Isabel, who once in a while sends me a message and she defaults to some of those. I know she's got, younger kids and stuff, but it's bizarre. I have to text her back and say, what does that mean?
What do you mean? Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've just got to constantly evolve, Ian, to keep up with the kids.
And we're cool, and we're the coolest part of our generation, and even we don't understand it. What hope is there for anyone else, Isabel?
And I also think it's probably different from one school to another, or one area to another. Little phrases take off, don't they? And they've all got their own little inwards. There's no hope for the rest of us.
Sigma. None at all. Isabel, thank you. Isabel Oakeshott is Talk's international editor. Comments on Skibbity. Comments on any of that, just get it in. I mean, do it. Give us a call. But the main thread of what we're talking about here is the response from the government, if you can call it a response, knife crime and for obvious reasons, many statements being made by senior politicians, including Yvette Cooper, who said, what about 2 IDs to stop kids getting knives on Amazon, as if that is going to stop knife crime in any way. They'll be laughing now. They'll be saying things like Sigma when they hear Yvette Cooper make that announcement. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Lots of comment coming through on ID, digital ID and the rest of it. Claire says, afternoon, Ian, a national ID card is a good idea. Up to a point. Do illegal migrants have any documentation to prove their actual identities? They toss away their passports and claim to be children, to claim extra. Are clearly not. As per usual, the ordinary citizens have to go through the whole hog and follow the rules to an enthusiastic degree, while others more favoured and esteemed will not. It's a two-tier joke if that one comes in. Thank you, Claire, for that. The government, of course, planning to make new laws, so making knife purchase more tricky. And by the way, I was reminded of a tweet that I got from Perry. Out of curiosity on how cheap and easy these knives can be obtained, I ordered this yesterday from Amazon. It's just been delivered. No age or ID verification, just left in a package on the doorstep and text me a confirmation delivery. Didn't even ring the doorbell. And there it is. He's put a tape measure next to the blade. It's a 5-inch, possibly slightly, 5-inch blade, slightly longer knife in totality. Purchased with nothing and dropped off on a doorstep. The government, of course, are responding to what happened. Axel Rudekubana stabbed 3 girls in Southport. He ordered the weapon online as a 17-year-old. New measures will include a 2-step verification with ID checks and a selfie video verification. Right, because that's really going to stop an absolute mad, murderous, horrendous, evil nutter like this person. With me is Norman Brennan. Who else would we speak to at a time like this? Norman's a former police officer, director of the Law and Order Foundation, a founder of Knives Destroy Lives. Norman, I've said it many times, we've been speaking for over 20 years, 25 years on this issue. You were a cop for over 3 decades. You've been on the receiving end of knife crime as well, a very serious attack on you. You speak about this, you're passionate about it, you know some of the solutions. What the hell is going on when the first response from the Home Secretary on this horrendous crime in Southport is to say, well, what about having a 2-tier ID check? Really?
Well, let me just remind you what the Conservatives did about zombie knives, Ian. It took them 8 years to define what a zombie knife was. Yeah. 8 years. And that was all about wording. In those 8 years, thousands of people were stabbed to death. Dozens of children were stabbed to death. Many thousands were maimed. This is no more than a red herring. It's a distraction, Ian. In Britain, there are probably 10 million households, probably 20 or 30. Let's stick with 10 million. If each of those households had 10 sharpened knives, normally in a knife block, that's 100 million knives, sharpened knives, available to anyone that wants them in Britain. Whether you take them from your own house, you burgle somebody else's house, you can get a knife. Yeah. Now, let me tell you the blunt truth, what everybody's missing here, and it's this. It's not knives that kill people, it's people that kill people. People get hold of a knife, and they stab people to death. It's a weapon. So why aren't we tackling people? And getting back to my original point about being froth and no substance, why are we concentrating on online purchases when that is really a bit of a myth? Most knives that people carry are taken from their own household.
Correct. In terms of what we do about it, now, you and I have talked many times about having tougher sentences. I was telling Julia earlier, I got chatting to an Iranian cab driver. Now, you wouldn't normally take advice from the Iranian mullahs on criminal justice. You know, they'll hang you by your testicles if you look at somebody the wrong way over there. However, on this particular point, he said, see what happens in Iran if you're caught as a kid carrying a knife. You'll go to jail for 20 years. Sometimes other regimes have it right.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Ian, I woke up this morning. I never got bed till 3 o'clock this morning because last night I saw that a 12-year-old child had been stabbed to death. 12-year-old child, one of the youngest in recent times in Birmingham. I woke up this morning 4 hours later and I spent an hour posting on all the stabbing murders around Britain. There was even a girl that was raped, for example, in Hampshire. This is how serious crime is out of Hill. She was abducted at knife point by 2 14-year-old boys. She's a 14-year-old. She was raped at knife point. Ian, the criminal justice system in Britain is a complete and utter mess in relation to what are the answers. For 35 years, even as a serving police officer, I wrote to the Queen. I went to number 10 Downing Street. I wrote to every single MP. We need 5 years mandatory prison sentences for an adult or a child, 3 years, for unlawfully carrying a knife on the streets of Britain. We need mass stop and search. We haven't got the police. We need 38,000 more police officers to take the streets back from the criminal element. We need a nationwide education programme. We need mentors. We need to give these kids something more worthwhile than doing than losing or taking somebody else's life. Ian, how long and how much do I have to scream and shout? I'm 65. I started campaigning in my 30s, having just survived being stabbed in the chest and being rushed to hospital thinking I was dying. What did I do? I never went back to work bitter and angry. I set up a charity. Do you know what, Ian? A week ago, please can I just finish? I set up a GoFundMe so I can get a small but formidable team together, not just to talk about it, but to get all the strands of all the other people like me around Britain that get no funding and have to beg for money. In the last month, I've raised £2,000. Last week, Maggie Oliver, God bless her, what hard work she does. She was promoted by a TV channel. In a week, thankfully, she raised £500,000.
Yeah.
Just look what I could do with just 1/5 of that. Unfortunately, everybody wakes up, Ian, and they say, what can we do about knife crime? Somebody must do something about knife crime. And do you know what? When I go out and beg for money, all those people that say, why doesn't someone do anything? Please do that. If I have to beg for money to save children's lives from being lost through stabbing, Ian, I'll beg. But there's only so much time and there's only so much life I've got left. And I'm coming towards the end now.
It doesn't help when the response from a Prime Minister or a Home Secretary, I don't dispute on a personal level, both Yvette Cooper and Starmer are parents. Both of them would have been as horrified and as saddened and upset and even outraged as anyone else. But when they put their political hat on, there's a new kind of skin that they sit in and deliver these kind of measured, almost press release type statements. You know, we will not tolerate this. And there's no sense of it being, there's no sense of incredulity or anger from these people. I want to hear Starmer go a bit Trump on us. I want to hear him just stand up and say, this is out of control. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Not, we're going to have an investigation, an inquiry. And then Yvette Cooper pitching up with, what about two-tier authentication when it comes to Amazon? I don't want to hear all of that. I want to hear anger. I want to hear action.
That's what I said this morning, Ian. I said, why can't we have someone like Trump? Britain needs a Trump, someone with vision, passion, direction, and the ability to stamp his hand on the table and say, I want this done. It must be done. Now, how many children have to lose their lives? How many communities have to live in fear before the government and Yvette Cooper wake up? Ian, the caveat to all of this, I'm Britain's leading law and order campaigner. I am Britain's leading independent knife campaigner. I also speak up on policing. I've shouted as an expert for 30 years. Why doesn't anyone listen? And more importantly, Ian,
act on that point. Listen, tell everybody, Norman, where they can find your GoFundMe page for this great work that I know you're passionate about, decades of it. I mean, your CV in this respect is there for all to see, and many would have seen and heard you on radio and TV over the years as well. It's a GoFundMe appeal. Whereabouts can we locate that page?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Norman Brennan, and if you Google GoFundMe appeals, it should come up. And what I've put myself up for, Ian, is to be the people's champion on law and order, not just to talk about things. I've got a 10-year plan together with a resource centre, respite locations, so much that everybody wants. And if I don't get the funding, Ian, I might as well just go up doing interviews and go and buy something out in the sticks and get some chickens.
Well, yeah, hopefully you can do both, and I certainly hope you do get the funding. Norman, as ever, thank you. So I think the usual way, if you can't find the GoFundMe page, is to, if you Google GoFundMe and then Norman Brennan, I'm sure you'll be able to find or locate it somehow, or go and follow Norman on Twitter as well. There will be an easy way to see the link from his Twitter page too. And we wish him all the luck in the world with that. Look, he's an incredibly passionate guy when it comes to this. And he's someone who speaks with immense qualification, not least being the victim I didn't go into the detail there, but he was in a horrifying attack where he was stabbed brutally in the chest while on... I mean, it was just horrific. Took him out of action for a long time. He campaigns, he shouts loudly, he's passionate, but he can't do it on his own. Check out the page, and if you want to help him, you can do so. I want your responses as well. What is the solution to knife crime? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
I'm not going to be spoken down to like some kind of child, OK? I don't know who you think you are. Just because you're a lord does not give you the ability to lord it over the rest of the public, OK? So talk to me as an equal, or else you can get lost.
I thought you were a journalist.
No, I'm a journalist. Yes, I am.
I'm going to answer your question if you'll shut up for a minute.
Go ahead.
Right. Prevent has prevented large numbers of people from becoming terrorists, but it does not succeed in every case. And you could not expect it to succeed in every case.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
One here from Paul in Medway says, I think it's time we name the kids who stab other kids and start making them human and not unnamed for legal reasons. As soon as we put a face to something, then it is more relatable. Parents will see a 13-year-old boy who looks like their son or a friend's son, and it becomes closer to home, and parents and friends will soon start to become more vigilant. Some kids may start to think twice about carrying, knowing they will be named. By not naming for legal reasons is putting a protective blanket over these kids, making them invincible. I get the sentiment there. I know there's implications with IDing kids, ramifications for the family, the wider community. Not everybody can move house. You know, what does it mean for the family if the family might be fine, the kid's gone nuts? Does their house then get firebombed because the kid lit? All of that. But I certainly understand the point. At the moment, nothing much happens, and under this government I can't see anything more happening, frankly. If that is the best they've got in the bag, to say, what about a two-tier verification on Amazon? That's your response to knife crime? Home Secretary? Are you serious? Jill is in Cornwall. What do you make of this, Jill? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Well, my question is, where are the parents in all of this? You know, what is a 12-year-old doing out at 10 o'clock at night?
Spot on.
You know, what are they doing carrying knives?
Yeah.
No one seems to be held responsible for these children. It seems to fall on police groups. That gentleman that you were talking to just now, who's obviously very concerned about it. But I always understood that a parent was responsible for a child up until the voting age, and anything that child did, the parent was answerable for it. But this seems to be, I mean, it's just got ridiculous. I would never accept my 14-year-old or 12-year-old out on a bus at 2 o'clock in the morning or walking around the streets. Yeah. I mean, goodness sake, I can't believe that these parents are allowed to be parents without being questioned as to why their son or daughter has done what they've done.
There is a real pattern there, isn't there, as well? And I know people talk about fatherless kids, and there are some who say, no, that's too easy to say that, but I think it's certainly a factor. But you know, they're rudderless kids, and you know, it may well be that the mum has just lost any level of control. The kind of gang culture in certain areas is far more addictive and welcoming than their home life. There's a bit of that. They feel quite cool. They can make a bit of money through petty crime, sometimes big crime. And, you know, carrying a knife is all part of it. And, you know, if they're into that life at the age of sort of 7, 8, 9, 10, then
that's it.
That's kind of it, isn't it? I mean, how do you get them back again?
Well, I think, as with everything, we always hope that a child goes to school at 5 and learns, you know, reading, writing, mathematics and all the rest of it. But they're also taught how to behave, what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. We can't keep putting all this on schools to educate these children. Yeah. I mean, schools have got enough to do without having to take on the responsibility of a child as a parent. I just feel that maybe if the parents were... when I say exposed, but maybe if the parents were questioned and made to explain how they allowed their child to be out at a particular time of night, or how it got a knife and all the rest. Maybe if we got the parents involved with this, maybe then we would have a situation where the children would be
and maybe there is something to be said about parental responsibility. I know in the States a couple of sort of school shooters, the parents have recently been jailed because that was seen as a relevant factor in these sort of out-of-control kids. Jill, thank you very much indeed for that. And anyone who's ever driven sort of late at night, early in the morning, will know that in a big city in particular, I used to drive back sort of 1 o'clock in the morning through all parts of the capital. Black cab drivers will tell you this. You know, it could be 1 in the morning. I'm driving down the old Kent Road or somewhere like that, and you'd always see kids out and about. And you knew that they were like 12 or 30. You think, how are you out? It's also a school night. How does this happen? This is Roy in Hampshire. Roy, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hello, fella. I'd just like to say, mate, I'm 78, and when I was about 5 or 6, I wanted a penknife. My dad gave me a little penknife.
Yep.
When I got a bit older, I had a jackknife. When I joined the Scouts, I had a sheath knife.
Yeah, me too.
I never thought about stabbing anybody.
No.
When we moved back up to London, I went to some of the roughest schools you could think of. And there were fights every day in the playground or outside after school. Nobody ever had a knife.
Yeah.
But in those days, mate, we had hanging and we had the birch. Well, I don't know about hanging, but bring back the birch. If half a dozen of these kids were birched and the word got round, because I don't know whether you know, when they birched somebody, they did it over 3 days. You got so many on the first day, so many on the second day, and on the third day you were screaming your head off because you knew what you were going to get.
You knew what was coming. What changed, do you think, though, Roy? Because you're right, my dad used to carry a penknife. He was old school. He had a penknife in one pocket, about £78 in coins in another pocket. There's always a wallet and a comb in the back pocket. And I wanted a penknife as well. I'm younger than you, but I got the penknife. When I joined the Scouts, I got a sheath knife. I got a couple of those. The only health and safety advice that was given was not to cut yourself. It was never a thought or a consideration that you might go nuts in the street and start using it for something else. What has changed in that kind of gap between the knife being seen as something that was used to whittle wood to a weapon of choice for kids on the streets?
I mean, once upon a time, I mean, the teachers had taught me when I went to the secondary school, most of those teachers had just fought a war. They were all, most of them were ex-soldiers.
Sure.
If there's something out of thing, you got a smack round the back of the head. I've got the cane about 5 times when I was at school for different things, you know, bunking off. You know, you never said a word out of place. I wouldn't say you were terrified of your teachers.
Yeah.
But you knew you had to behave yourself. If you know, you're talking about one-parent families. Well, my mum and dad split up when I was 9. My mum brought me up.
Yeah.
You know, all my brothers, they were in the forces.
There are a lot of one-parent families out there where the kids didn't go nuts and start stabbing each other. Listen, I've got to stop there, Roy, because we hit the clock, but thank you for that. Carl says, I can't believe all the mainstream media are talking about is buying a knife on Amazon and clamping down on social media. Starmer's going to use this to suppress free speech when in reality we should be increasing sentences for carrying and bringing back stop and search regardless of who it upsets, says Carl. Yeah, well, we're certainly talking about what the penalties should be or what maybe the solution is. You know, prison and stop and search are not the only answers here. Is there something else going on? What is the solution to knife crime? How do we begin that process of stopping kids? A 12-year-old just yesterday fatally stabbed in broad daylight. A 14-year-old arrested on suspicion of murder. This is not normal. This should not be something we roll over and go, what, again? Our lines are open. More detail coming up on the other side of the news at 2, which is next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Lots to get through in this section. As you've been hearing, we are talking about the new rules on knife crime. Yes, the Home Secretary and Keir Starmer are going to stop knife crime because they've got this great tactic, double age verification. Whoa, that'll stop the gang members. They must be quivering at the moment in their new Nikes when they heard this news. Yvette Cooper said it's a disgrace that you can buy a knife on Amazon. Well, I think you might need to do something a little more significant than just getting people to do a swift ID check. We'll have more on that. Also, the British passport is to be made available on smartphones by 2027. Yesterday, we revealed that the driving licence this year will be in your government's digital wallet on your phone. Is that great convenience? Do you say bring it on? Or do you smell something a little sinister about the government having all of your ID in a digital wallet? And a convicted benefit cheats could face being banned from driving as part of the plan to crack down on fraud. Your thoughts on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Lots more comment from you. We've got loads of messages. I'll get through as many of those as I possibly can, and more calls on the way as well. We've got Kevin Schofield who's joined us in the studio. Kevin, of course, is the political editor over there at HuffPost UK, fresh from Parliament. Just been there, a ringside seat, of course, at the gladiatorial event that is PMQs, or it used to be at some point. How was it looking today?
It didn't feel like a gladiatorial event, really. Kemi Badenoch wrong-footed everyone, I think, including their own MPs, by not going on Southport. Everyone assumed.
I couldn't believe.
Yeah, a lot of Tory MPs, you could see their faces looked a little bit surprised, to put it mildly, as well as colleagues in the press gallery. It seemed like an obvious way to do it, but maybe she was thinking, I'll wrong-foot the Prime Minister, asked me about something else. So she asked them on the education bill that's currently going through Parliament. I mean, there is controversy around it.
Sure.
It's provoked quite a lot of a backlash from academies, but again, she didn't really land a blow. Keir Starmer managed to, he didn't really enlighten us with any of his answers, but she didn't manage to elicit any killer fact or discombobulate him in any way. So yeah, it was a bit of an odd one, really. I
mean, you sort of begin to see why other parties like Reform UK are sort of riding high and punching well above their weight. I mean, it's ludicrously above their weight in terms of, Rupert Lowe and others who are getting, a lot of airtime. I know that Farage is, a very sort of mesmeric character. He's a good media player, so he has a disproportionate amount of time on question time and things like that. But nonetheless, the speaking the language that people will go, yeah, you represent me, doesn't really come from the opposition leader asking important questions as they are, and there are other platforms and times they can be raised. But the knife crime issue would have been an obvious one to go on, and certainly on the back of what many are saying, it was a wholly inept response from the Home Secretary about two-tier verification. It was an open goal for Kemi Badenoch.
You would have thought so. I mean, unless she was concerned about the Prime Minister being able to say, well, hang on a minute, you guys had 14 years to do something about it and you failed. We're actually taking action. You can see him coming back that way. But I don't think that is enough of a reason for you not to ask the question because you're frightened of what answer you might get. I mean, she did say, to be fair to her, she said at the very top of it, she says, look, she referred to Southport, she says, we will come back to that at a later date. Fine. But I think, as I say, a lot of people were very surprised that she didn't choose this date.
Well, indeed. And of course, this person was referred to prevent 3 times under the previous administration, and caught carrying a knife under the previous administration. So it's very hard for her to kind of take any moral high ground when she was literally part of the previous administration.
Yeah, exactly. And the Crown Prosecution Service have also, the head of the CPS has come out today and basically said that they basically told the government don't release information. Now, there's been this suggestion of a cover-up about information that Keir Starmer knew and didn't reveal it. He says it was because he didn't want to prejudice the trial. The CPS have come out and backed him up. So maybe there was a concern amongst the Tories that he could come back and say, well, would you overrule the Crown Prosecution Service? I don't know. I mean, I suppose it would have been considered amongst Kemi Badenoch's team, do we go on Southport? And they tried to war game it, and the ultimate decision was taken not to do it. But again, I think it was quite surprising.
Do we want different kinds of politicians now? Or is it just a sort of parochial echo chamber of some people want? I was looking back to when I used to be in the press gallery as well, and I can remember, obviously, Blair was slightly before me going there, but Brown wasn't. Now, Gordon Brown was a pretty dull sort of character. But he was quite ballsy and passionate at the dispatch box, wasn't he? I mean, if he had a bee in his bonnet, if he was upset about something, he did have that kind of firebrand lefty thing going on,
yeah, he did,
which made him, you know, a slightly more entertaining entity at the dispatch box than Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
And since then, you know, and then of course David Cameron comes along, he's super slick, so he's a bit Blair-like, and he was very good at it. But I don't know whether that's any longer the qualification. And lots of people saying today, obviously because Trump is so much in the news, that, you know, a leader that would go, hang on a second, I'm not standing for this. That sort of language, rather than, you know, a spad that's written a paragraph, says, read this, Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Something that comes from the heart, where you absolutely get animated about something.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, social media, I think, plays a big part in it now as well. You very often see, every week, you see the parties will clip up the best soundbite from Kemi Badenoch, Keir Starmer, and put it up on the social media, and, you know, to try and get clicks, and that's what it's all driven by, rather than great parliamentary rhetoric.
Sure.
So that's, you could say, dumbed it down a little bit, you know.
True.
And we just don't have maybe the patience anymore for, you know, it was very methodical 6 questions that she asked today about the minutiae of this bill, which is, you know, very interesting, but again, it's not going to set the pulses racing. And you're right what you say about reform, you know, whereas you say what you like about Nigel Farage, he's very good at, you know, hitting these lines and just speaking the language, obviously, that a lot of people speak themselves and agree with him on. And I don't think, if it had been Nigel Farage, put it that way, he would have passed up the opportunity to go on Southport.
And there's been many MPs on both sides. I mean, the obvious examples like Dennis Skinner, you know, who would, you know, it was always a moment, everyone went quiet when he asked a question at PMQs, because you knew it was going to be something that was sort of, there'd be a little bit of humour thrown in there as well, but it was always going to be a good question. I don't care whether they're left or right, you just want to hear somebody who sounds as if they mean it, they're passionate about something, that they're incredulous about something.
Yeah, you're right, and we don't really have that. Kemi Badenoch doesn't give the impression of that kind of fire in her belly. Keir Starmer certainly doesn't. Angela Rayner's a bit different. Maybe if she was the Prime Minister, I'm not suggesting that she should be, but if she were the Prime Minister, it might be a little bit more punchy. You see sometimes when she stands in for Keir Starmer, if he's abroad, she stands in for him at PMQs, and, you know, you have a better chance of a decent line actually coming from
Exactly. I mean, I've said this time and time again, when she was up against Johnson at PMQs, which she was on many occasions, of course, because she was deputy, I used to think, look, forget the fact that I can't think of anything I really agree with Angela Rayner on, but I love her backstory. You know, girl from a council house, single mother at about the age of 16 or something. And there she is, questioning the Prime Minister in the Houses of Parliament across the floor. I think that's an amazing journey, and sounding a bit normal, if that's the right word for Angela Rayner, but you take the point. And, you know, with the passion there.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to see that on all sides. You know?
Yeah, no, there's definitely, she does have, she's a rare politician in that she does resonate with normal people. You know, whether or not you agree with her politics or not, you know, she does sound like a normal person. In a way, oddly, Boris Johnson managed to do it, even though he sounds really posh.
100%.
But he somehow, you know, you saw the polls, what people would like to have a pint down the pub with. Oh, I'd like to have a pint with Boris Johnson. You know, he just has that certain way about him, and there are those few politicians are actually few and far between.
Well, it's that Johnson could do the positivity thing really well, which is what Trump's done. I mean, the golden age has begun is genius, you know, from Trump. And wow, talk about encapsulate where you're going. You know, we're starting from scratch. The new age has begun. That's exciting. It's enticing. It's got a purpose to it. I mean, it could fall flat on its whatsits after a year. Who knows? But certainly the mood music to set the stage like that. I don't think I've ever heard a British politician sound like that.
No, I mean, he doesn't sound like a politician. That's
100%.
That is it. And the way that, again, Boris Johnson at times didn't sound like a politician. You know, the way that he spoke, Angela Rayner, those types of figures, you know, people quite like. They don't like the classic politician's answer or non-answer. You know, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and dodging the question. You know, there's if you have a certain rhetorical flourish, people actually like that, just because you sound a little bit different and you're new and shiny. So I think at the moment, I think we need to settle down. As long as Kemi Badenoch's going to be Tory leader for a while, then it's going to be quite dull PMQs, unfortunately.
Bring back Tim Farron, because he was really lively. Let's have a look at this one. Rachel Reeves facing a bit of a battle with Sadiq Khan over the Heathrow airport expansion. Sadiq is leading a Labour rebellion against Reeves over her backing for Heathrow's third runway. Of course, this will not just be a row with Khan, it would be, one would assume, a row with Ed Miliband as well.
And Keir Starmer, because it looks as though Keir Starmer's been on a bit of a journey. So he previously was against a third runway. There are numerous quotes of him congratulating the campaigners who have thus far managed to prevent the third runway from being built. Now, his spokespeople were asked after Prime Minister's questions, has he changed his mind? And they wouldn't say that he hasn't. They just kept going on about, well, you know, the number one mission of the government is growth. Any airport expansion must contribute to economic growth and meet our environmental obligations. So they're certainly not saying that he is opposed to it. So I think we can take it from that, yeah, Rachel Reeves is going to back it, Keir Starmer backs Rachel Reeves, and yeah, there will be a big Labour split on this because Sadiq Khan is very much opposed to it.
Yeah. And a big runway as well.
A very big runway, yeah. They've been talking about it for such... I'd be amazed if it ever happened.
Talking about forever. I feel since I've been born. They've been talking about this thing.
I remember Boris Johnson, going back to Boris Johnson, talk about how he would lie down in front of the bulldozers when they came to... Because he was an MP for...
Yeah.
When he was...
Kensington?
No, it was in the west, further west, out towards Heathrow. It wasn't when he was Henley MP.
Henley, yes, that would be right. Yeah, Henley, yes.
And then, lo and behold, when he became Prime Minister, he, I think the Foreign Secretary famously went to Afghanistan so he would avoid a vote on the third runway. I think once they get into power, the Treasury has a wee word in the ear say, look, this would be great for economic growth.
But I mean, this buries their whole net zero credibility, doesn't it? Surely, if you expand Heathrow, which I hope they do, by the way, but if you do it, and on the other hand, you're telling everybody, we need to fly less and all the rest of it, and then they'll come up with one of these kind of half-baked weirdo schemes, which is like, don't worry, that contractors will have to offset their contribution by, paying £6 a month on a direct debit to some environmental charity to save orangutans in Borneo, or something of that nature. Plant a tree in Cleethorpes.
That's actually scarily accurate, actually. So they've developed some sort of nature fund, which would basically be, if you want to do something that's bad for the environment, bung a few quid in this fund, which will help environmental projects elsewhere in the country, and you'll get the go-ahead as long as it contributes to economic growth. So they're putting all their eggs in the economic growth basket, even if it means trampling over previous environmental obligations that they've made in the past.
Here's a question. How many people know who David Wilkie is? Robert Wilkie. David Wilkie was the swimmer, wasn't he? He was a swimmer.
Scottish swimmer.
He was a Scottish swimmer. Yeah. Is he no longer with us, David Wilkie?
I think you might be right, actually. I think in the last year or two. I seem to remember, yeah. I think that he won did he win the gold medal?
I think he did.
At the Olympics.
And then didn't he appear on that... Do you remember that Superstars programme that used to be on a Friday night?
Oh, I used to love Superstars. Brian Jacks.
Kevin Keegan. Remember Kevin Keegan injuring his foot on the running track?
Scraped his whole leg.
Bad injury, wasn't it?
In a cycling
race. That's what it was, yeah.
I mean, the guy was
he ripped his own trainer off,
He was like the best player in England.
Oh, that was a great show. Anyway, that's a diversion. Not David Wilkie, Robert Wilkie, Donald Trump's transition team head. He's criticised Labour's decision to cede the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Now, this is going to go on and on. I've got a vague, I wouldn't say defence, because I don't know enough about the geopolitical kind of reasoning behind this one, if I'm perfectly honest, Kevin, but I do know that this started under the last government's watch, so you can't really say, this is, two-tier Keir with his, giveaway island bonanza, because James Cleverly was penning the various agreements before they even got in.
He set the ball rolling on these negotiations. Now, the Tory defence is, well, we didn't finalise the deal, and if we'd struck a deal, it wouldn't be this deal. This is a terrible deal.
Would say that,
but you can't possibly disprove that.
I reckon, bearing in mind, I don't think for 1 second that Angela Rayner, Keir Starmer, David Lammy sat down in the Rose and Crown one night and came up with the deal. I would imagine probably about 300 civil servants, top lawyers and people that are across this stuff, they came up with the deal.
Yeah, and if the Conservatives...
The same deal that the Tories
would have. If the Conservatives were still in power, they would still be making the case for this deal, which they're now criticising. That's how politics works. But it is on Labour's watch that this is happening.
Yeah, true.
They are getting an awful lot of criticism for it. And, yeah, Donald Trump has effectively been given a veto by the government. They were desperate to get it over the line before he became president because they knew that his team and he are not big fans of the deal. So we're waiting to see exactly what the verdict is from the White House, because if he pulls the plug, then it's a huge embarrassment for Keir Starmer.
Could he pull the plug? Do you think he could now? I mean, because he's really in a pincer movement on this one.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly, the mood music coming out of Washington is that they do not like this deal. Yeah. And it does impact on them, obviously, because it's the UK-US airbase at Diego Garcia. That's what this is all about, really. Why we have this interest in the territory. So if he is advised and if he believes that it's bad for US national security, then you've got to imagine there's a fair chance that he will say, well, I'm not in favour of it. And then the rubber really does hit the road. Is there then going to be a big diplomatic spat over it? Or does Keir Starmer just fold because he wants to keep in Donald Trump's good books?
There it is. Kev, you're dismissed for the day, of course. You know, and of course, as any good political journalist, once PMQ's finished, that's it, isn't it? Down the pub.
That's it. There's nothing else to do, really.
Nothing else to do. Kevin Schofield, thank you, Kev. Good to see you again. Kevin Schofield, political editor at HuffPost UK, with us on the programme. Over to you. Back to your comments, particularly on knife crime. What is the solution to knife crime? Anything else you've heard along the way as well? Happy to take those calls too. Just gone. Called away. In fact, coming up on 2:20, this is Talk.
In his opposition to so-called gender-affirming care for children, he is protecting kids who will probably turn out to be gay or lesbian when they grow up.
Yeah.
There are a lot of statistics to support
huge amount of evidence that is often the case. Exactly. A lot of vulnerable children with autism and the like. Yeah, I thought that was particularly strange. But also, trans people apparently living in fear.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It's 2:20. At the beginning of the show, at the beginning of the hour, we had on... Oh, sorry, let me start that again. In the last hour, we had Norman Brennan on with us. Norman is a champion of law and order. He's a former cop of about 30-odd years' experience. He's been a victim of knife crime, and for 3 decades he's opined and toured TV and radio studios, attempting to get the message out there about how successive governments and areas of the legal system have completely missed the point on trying to solve knife crime. He set up a GoFundMe page where he wants to raise enough money so he can put together just a small team. It might be him and one other, whoever it happens to be, so they can at least make some headway. It's interesting, when we interviewed him, he had about 2,000 quid of a £5,000 target raised. Within 20 minutes of him coming on, that doubled. It's about over £4,000 he's raised so far. He wants to take it to other levels. He wants to make sure that the platform that knife crime deserves has never been really reached. He wants to do it. He does appear a lot on the media. He wants to increase that. He wants the message out there. He wants more politicians to take notice, stop listening to spads, listen to people at the coalface, listen to those that have worked the areas, that know the problems, that can give you ideas of the solutions. If you want to donate to his GoFundMe page, very simply, if you're not following me on social media, do that now, because it's the last thing that I tweeted is a link to his GoFundMe page. I can't tell you how important this is to Norman Brennan and those that are advocating for real change, not two-tier verification, proper change that makes a difference, where we begin to go, you know, I want to hear a politician talk like Norman talks. I want to hear Yvette Cooper talk with the same level of passion that Norman Brennan talks, not read from a pre-prepared advisor's statement, a paragraph that talks about nothing that really sounds meaningful or has any passion. And I don't, never ever have I for 1 second thought that politicians don't care about me. Of course they do on one level, but as politicians, they're the people charged with sorting it all out. Norman wants to head that up. He wants to take it further. And if you want to find the link to his GoFundMe page, follow me on social media, on Twitter or on X, at Ian Collins UK. That's at Ian Collins UK. Follow me there. And the last thing that I tweeted is the link to Norman's GoFundMe page. £4,000 raised, and half of that was raised in 20 minutes after Norman's appearance. He's got a £5,000 target. Clearly, I think he's being polite there. If he can get more, he can do more. But if we can hit that 5,000 by the end of the show, that would be amazing work. You heard what he had to say, and if you want to support him, check out his link, and I've tweeted that on my Twitter X page, at Ian Collins UK. If you follow me there, you can find the link. Let's go to your calls. Matt is in Cheshire on this issue. How you doing, Matt?
Hi, good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon.
I'd also like to say how Norman Brennan's probably one of the most emotional and passionate speakers on any issue I've ever heard in my life.
100%.
So he's the antithesis of everything that this government is.
Yeah.
Just every year in Britain, we have increasingly horrific and savage violent crimes as we simultaneously have more gutless and useless politicians.
Yep.
Valdo Calacane was black, Ruda Cabana black, most knife crime killers are black, most victims black. The black population is 5%, the prison population is 8%, the Muslim population is 8%, the prison percentage is 15%. What we are seeing is the savagery resulting from irresponsible immigration and the tiptoeing around black and Muslim immigrants and the children of immigrants. There has never been a better case for the death sentence in my life and a stop on immigration from backward African and Islamic countries. And your street cred and TikTok videos from your cell don't exist if you're dead.
You are spot on. If you're dead, there is, you know, really nothing is going to make anyone feel any better. Tell me this, let me just put my other hat on here, where people will go, well, hang on a second. Yes, there are disproportionalities, but most knife crime victims and perpetrators are white. Yes, you're looking at percentages and proportions. So the idea that this is a form of criminality that is, I mean, certain types of it, gang-related knife crime, you will find a disproportionate amount of black victims and black perpetrators. If you go outside of that particular area of gang-related, you'll find that that demographic changes. What would you say to that?
that savagery is now leaking into normal society. Callacane was, I think, Brazilian, apparently mentally ill, wandering around the streets with a rucksack. 3 white people are dead, 2 students and a pensioner. 3 children are dead because of the son of an immigrant whose father knew he was a knife lunatic. These people, the parents should be put in prison as well. We should even considering put politicians in prison. We're tiptoeing around again year after year. The chattering classes have these revolting sort of endless circular conversations. Norman Brennan can't say what I can because he's a public figure, but you don't solve brutality with Yvette Cooper.
And a 2-tier verification system.
Yeah. The only thing brutal, violent, nasty pieces of work fear is brutality upon them. The police need powers to bounce people around. I said it to you 2 years ago, Ian. I'm going to keep saying it. We had guns in Manchester in the 90s, and they got rid of it by basically bouncing people around, throwing people against walls. Even if they got the wrong person now and then, they eventually made communities a little bit better.
So you want a more of a life on Mars approach, Matt, to policing?
Oh, at the end of the day, and I want what works, and we'll never, ever, ever, ever get that from a Conservative or Labour government.
We've totally changed the citizens' relationship with law and order. I think we can all agree on that, whether it was the Labour government. And I'm not going to let the Tories off the hook on this one either, Matt. I mean, we heard little more. Most of the stuff that happened with this horrendous creature in Southport happened when the Tories were in power. They weren't doing enough. Nobody seems to want to do enough. There's too many agitators out there, too many characters coming in on the argument saying, oh, these people need help. You know, we've got to understand different identities. We've got to understand people's human rights, etc. We've got to, you know, we can't have harsh reactions to things. It needs a more delicate and intelligent approach. It's BS because it hasn't worked.
This country is 1,000 years old, and we went through many a brutal and savage time ourselves to reach a point where we were probably the most civilized nation on earth, and probably the nation on earth that everybody respected the most for its streets and its behaviour.
Yeah.
That is not all now falling apart in our lifetime because of a few vile little scroats that gutless people like Keir Starmer do not have the guts to address.
Yeah, never will. Matt, thank you very much indeed. Never will because he's Keir Starmer, because he's a lousy politician. He's an awful political operator, and he, you know, misses the... And you know what? It's interesting. I was thinking about the phone-in we did yesterday about, you know, was there a cover-up over Southport? I think cover-up is the wrong word. There's more than one thing going on there. I said this yesterday, you can wear more than one hat at any one time. There's lots of things Starmer could have said, just to clarify on yesterday, that wouldn't necessarily have prejudiced a trial, OK? He said it would prejudice a trial. Look, there's things he could have said that wouldn't have done. It would have been weird if they had done. You can err on the side of caution. That's not a criminal offence. It's a very lawyer-type response to things. My point is I don't know whether it would have made any difference to rioting or what subsequently happened, and I don't know if having that information would have made a difference, and would that information travel fully if you said, well, you know, this man's been charged with murder, but, you know, the murder isn't terrorist related, but then he had a manual which might be a sheet of A4, as some insiders have suggested, or a page on his website, and then he had some rice in, but that's not related to the... Is it better to say nothing than to try and get all of this stuff out in context, bearing in mind there's going to be a trial that will establish all of this stuff? So you know, it's not straightforward, and these things are never straightforward. But that isn't really my area of interest in this one. My area of interest is in the Prime Minister himself, his inability to stand there in a credible fashion, to sound like a bloke with a plan, to sound like an angry man, to sound like a fella that means business, to sound like a man who's going to have the backs of you and your kids to protect the nation, a man who you know is on your side, a man who will score goals for you, not for himself, not for his political ideology. He will do it for you. He will stand in front of you in order to take the bullet rather than you. That's what I want to hear. Don't hear any of that from Keir Starmer because he's a rubbish politician. He's just demonstrably bad at being a politician. And we haven't got that voice. And then Yvette Cooper is rolled out with the same kind of groupthink, press release type mentality, talking about her two-tier verification if you want to buy a knife. Like that's going to stop anybody, rather than going, do you know what, we've had enough of this, guys. We've really had enough of this. I want more police on the streets. I want them stopping, searching people. If you get caught with a knife, you go to jail. Straight away, 5 years, end of story. If you're about 9 years old, we'll have a look at the case and see what we can do. But we're going to deal with this. Don't worry, I'm going to sort it. It's my first big job in office. We don't hear that. We don't hear that tone. It's the tonal nature and the lack of credibility which is created because of the type of politicians we've put into office. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It's Talk 2523. Claire says, where are we going wrong on knife crime? The disintegration of the family unit, the stopping of corporal punishment, the absorbing of cultural trends and way of life, the Americanization of our country with its gang mentality and life, the climb down on the stop and search and policing being a farce rather than a force, and parents not being responsible for their kids' actions. I could go on, but it starts with parents, so the parents need to be lawfully answerable when their offspring are caught holding knives and going to detention centres if serious offences take place. We'll come back to more comment and words from you shortly. Let's continue on that issue of benefit cheats. Interesting one. It's a new law that could see benefit cheats banned from driving for up to 2 years. People who owe more than £1,000 in wrongly claimed benefits and refuse to pay it back will be targeted under this proposal. The law would also allow investigators to take money directly from people's bank accounts to recover fraudulently claimed funds. I thought they could do that anyway. Reem Ibrahim is Communication Officer at the IEA, the Institute for Economic Affairs. Reem, good afternoon to you.
Hello, good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us as always. I mean, what do you make of this? I've lost count of how many governments I've heard say, yeah, they're going to get tough on knife crime. Now they're going to get tough on benefit fraud. Spoiler alert, they won't do either.
Well, I'm not against the proposal in principle. I think that in principle, trying to reduce the number of people that are scrounging or are indeed taking benefits when they otherwise shouldn't is generally a good thing to do. And the government should be looking into people that are ultimately taking advantage of a system that allows them to do so. That being said, it's really random. I mean, what does your license actually have to do with actually taking over those benefits in the first place? And also, that being said, this actually might result in lots of people not being able to work. So if you cheat the system and you take benefits where you shouldn't, maybe that's a top up, so you are still working at the same time, and you have your license taken away, then you're going to be potentially unable to work or unable to get to work, and so actually claiming those benefits may be legitimate. Yes. Exactly. So my worry is that it's a bit of a cycle, and it's almost an incredibly random thing to do. I think it's also symptomatic of a system in which people are able to take advantage, and they are increasingly able to do so. I mean, we have about 10% of the adult working population on some kind of out of work benefit, usually as a result of mental health sickness. So after the pandemic, we had huge numbers of people that were now claiming mental health benefits as a result of those issues. Now, technically speaking, it's very difficult to decide whether or not those people are lying or not lying. Many of them are probably telling the truth. But the point is that they shouldn't be able to sign off on sickness benefits when they are mentally ill. There is absolutely no evidence that when you are depressed, the best thing for you is to be signed off as long-term sick. And you know what the real scandal about this is? As soon as you are signed off long-term sick, nobody asks about you. So the job centres don't ask about you. You're not counted in unemployment statistics. So the government can say, well, we've got unemployment down really low. But how many of these people are just missing?
That's a very good point. And it's much easier, perhaps, for the system, let's call it that, to deal with somebody who's on long-term sick. Might cost them a few more quid, but actually that's a price worth paying to get rid of a bit of a headache and not have to add to the unemployment figures or get into any other kind of arguments.
Absolutely. And I really want to stress this point. It's not just about the people that are fraudulent or are intentionally trying to scam the system. There are obviously many people that do that, and I think that that's absolutely disgusting that they are taking hard-earned taxpayer money. The rest of the country has to work. That being said, I really want to stress this point. It's not just a waste of taxpayer money. It's a waste of human potential. These are people that could be contributing to the economy, that could be contributing to society, that could have the dignity that work gives you, but they don't. And it's because the welfare system actively incentivises them not to.
There's going to be a problem going forward, isn't there? Because all the smart money Reem says the benefits bill is going to go up. We have, obviously a big chunk, I think possibly even the majority of the welfare budget goes on old age pension. We've got more pensioners, which is fantastic in one way. Clearly, people live longer, etc. But of course, that's very costly for the health service. It's also costly for the welfare system too. So you have that. Throw in mental health issues, which have increased exponentially off the scale. So you've got increased amounts of people there. And then the other factor is AI, which sounds a bit weird now. But, again, there's a lot of good evidence that we'll have a greater amount of people not working because they simply won't be needed in the conventional workplace. So this sort of triple problem hanging around this looks set to increase the welfare budget as we move through the years.
Yes, I will say I disagree with you about AI. I think that AI is actually quite a positive technological advancement that makes us more efficient. I mean, do you remember when computers were invented?
Yeah.
Loads of people were saying, oh, well, these computers are going to mean that everybody's going to be unemployed because they're going to replace our jobs. That just didn't happen.
No.
It meant that computers meant that we became more efficient. It meant the economy as a whole was more efficient. And therefore, it meant that actually we're able to do things in a much more productive way and ultimately compete with our neighbours. I think what's really important, though, is that first point that you made about the growing size of the welfare state. You are right, part of it is pensions, and actually a lot of it is pensions. We spend almost double the entire budget of the Ministry of Defence on pensions alone. Now, that's a bit more of a difficult question because if you're a pensioner and you've paid in your whole life, you expect that state pension. The problem is that the government have also promised the state pension is going to be triple locked. So it means that it's going to rise in line with inflation, or by 2.5%, or indeed by average wage growth, depending on whichever one is higher. So it does mean that it's a huge, huge cost. I think there has to be a genuine conversation about whether or not the pension system is sustainable. But on this point about mental health and benefits, Fraser Nelson, who's the former editor of The Spectator, did a fantastic documentary on Channel 4. I don't normally compliment Channel 4. But
indeed, we played a little clip of it. We played a little clip of it earlier, and Fraser was in with us at the time when the documentary came out. It was almost a departure for Channel 4. Wow, they've actually gone there. But you're right, it highlighted lots of these very problems.
Yes, and the one thing that was, I'd really recommend people to watch it if they haven't. One thing that really struck me was the story about this guy who had been claiming out of work benefits, sickness benefits for a number of years due to his poor mental health. But he actually said to the job centre, I want to seek retraining. I think he said something like he wanted to go and do a course on painting and decorating. And he said, I really want to, I'm feeling a bit better. I really want to get back into work because I think it'll be really good for me. And the job centre, the very people that are supposed to be encouraging him into work, said to him, if you are to seek retraining, that may call into question how sick you are, and you may have those benefits taken away from you. And so he didn't show up to the job. Wow. He didn't show up to the interview because he was being told actively by the job centre, this is the consequence if you show that you are well. So I think there is a real problem here that the system incentivises people not to work. I'm of the view that we should not be automatically signing people off on long-term sickness benefits if they have mental health issues. And mental health issues are very real. I'm not saying they're not. They are absolutely real. But if you are a depressed person, surely the worst thing for you to happen to you is for you to be told by the state, don't worry, stay at home. That's probably the worst thing.
Yeah, I mean, surely it can't be beyond the wit of mankind to come up with a way that there's a line. You say, well, you can retain that assistance that you're getting from the state while you go looking for the job, and hopefully you get the job, and maybe you can do all sorts of things to continue your endeavours in trying to find gainful employment, which eventually will stop you. But if you do it in the meantime, we're going to just scrap you. I mean, that's just clearly a nonsense, and no one seems to have been able to. Ian Duncan Smith, as you know, was amazing in really giving it a good go in trying to address this kind of Gordian knot of all problems that existed forever in the welfare system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And part of the problem is that there are just so many different types of benefits that people can get. Yeah. I refer back to Fraser Nelson's documentary. There was one story of this very young girl. She was honestly about my age or a little bit older. She was a single mum, and she was being told that actually, if she does try and seek retraining, she'll end up having those benefits taken away from her, and that will obviously affect her son, her very, very young son. But also, they calculated it, and actually when you add up all of the different benefits that young girl was getting, it came to about £40,000. Most people in this country don't earn £40,000. I think average wages are just below 30. Yeah. So the fact that somebody on benefits with a child, I might add, is able to get money that they just will not be able to earn in the private sector, I think is real proof that the system itself is broken. Absolutely. The system is broken. Will it ever be fixed? Reem, thank you as ever. Reem Ibrahim, who's Communication Officer over there at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Thank you to her. Comments on that as well. It does become there's obviously people who take the piddle when they come down to the job centre who, clearly know every rule and regulation. That's never, ever going to be anything but a small percentage, but the small percentage is significant in terms of money. There's lots of money that's not even claimed when people could claim it. I'm never going to sit here and, pretend that everybody who's on a benefit is somehow swinging the lead and playing the system, because that's clearly not the case, and anyone that says it is a half-wit. And it's also quite hard to get quite a lot of benefits, but that few that are able, and they might be small in number, but they're massively significant in damage, that do know how to screw the system, and they know how to do it, properly, not just a case of, telling them a different date for when you started your new job. This is industrial scale stuff. Those kind of characters, man alive.
I mean, they're the people you want to find, but will it ever be solved? And sometimes it's argued that, in fact, the effort required to try and solve it is greater than the money you eventually claw back. What do you hire another 500 people to go looking for the fraudsters? Once in a while, you'll get somebody who said, I can hardly walk. And then there's a picture of them, at a gymkhana or doing a taekwondo competition or something. And that's always rather amusing for those daytime TV shows. But broadly speaking, there's not enough people that can chase those who are messing with the system. Charlie is in Stourbridge. Charlie, on this very point, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon.
Listening to you having that interesting chat with Isabel about specifically the Motability side of things. I used to work for one of the major breakdown organisations in the 90s, back when things were sort of normalish, and I used to man the sort of breakdown side on incoming calls from Motability users.
Sure.
And one of them called in, we put the reg in, and it identifies the vehicle, and it pops up, and it was a Harley Davidson.
Really?
Which is mad. I looked at my colleague, I said, is this right? And,
he was given the Harley Davidson as a mode of transport or bought it with money? What was the deal there?
Well, I think you can contribute. You can up the ante if you want to go for a better vehicle and use your or at the time at least, your disability payment to finance a better vehicle. But it was on a Harley Davidson. I thought, how disabled are you?
Well, and even if the disability was true, I mean, a Harley Davidson? Really? I mean, that kind of smacks a little bit more of somebody's idea of a vanity purchase, right?
Yeah. Well, this is it. They're obviously claiming for something that they allegedly have got, a problem or whatever. It's not been properly assessed, so they get the money and then they do what they want. But I saw this happen on a few occasions thinking back, where you'd have an inappropriate vehicle where, like a low-slung vehicle that was a sport model or whatever, which you'd have trouble getting out of if you're able-bodied. And then, as you probably remember, it was just after the point where, remember the old blue three-wheeler?
Yes, that was just going through my mind as you were saying that.
Yeah, that's where that started ended. I had a disabled colleague who had one of those. Now, they weren't the best for, obviously, luggage and...
No, I mean, talking about somebody pointing a big arrow at you, saying this person is claiming a benefit of some sort. Look, we've even given them a wacky old car from the sort of thing the anthill mob would have adopted.
That's right. They were a bit dodgy, weren't they? But by all other people who used to get contacting us would be calling in repeatedly because they were being targeted by their neighbours because they were not necessarily outwardly disabled, but they could have had other issues. They'd have all their tyres slashed quite often. That was a very common call for us. But outside of that...
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I was in the Tesco car park the other day and a fella got out of a Porsche who was in the disabled bay, and I thought, it's typical, isn't it? So I know it's a stereotype, or, somebody driving $100,000 worth of car thinks they're entitled to park anywhere, and that went through my mind, and then I smacked myself down for that. But then I looked, and he had the blue badge in the window, and I saw him walk out and trot off up to Tesco. And, of course, your first thought is, there's nothing wrong with this bloke. Now, lots of people go, hidden disabilities. You don't know what's wrong with somebody. He could have a heart condition. Which I suppose is true, right?
That's not necessarily true. I mean, I quite often used to nip down to the Asda down by me and park in the multi-storey car park right opposite all the disabled bays, see the usual people, get in there, nice SUV or whatever, all pile out there, spot the disabled person because they'd be walking around as long as I was around that supermarket and come back and pretty much meet them on the way out.
Heart conditions, Charlie.
Yeah, but no.
Everyone's got a heart condition.
Yeah, but you look at it. If you look back in the 80s and 90s, you used to have 5 disabled bays in a supermarket car park.
That's
now,
a very good point.
90.
Yeah. Sometimes I go into Tesco and it's like every bay is got somebody in it, but the disabled ones are kind of empty. But there's, like you say, there's about 100 of them. Listen, Charlie, I've got to move for time, but thank you for that. Love the Harley Davidson story. More from you coming up next. And, of course, the Voice of Doom, Day 11, is back after this.
I'm not going to be spoken down to like some kind of child, OK? I don't know who you think you are. Just because you're a lord does not give you the ability to lord it over the rest of the public, OK? So talk to me as an equal, or else you can get lost.
I thought you were a journalist.
No, I'm a journalist. Yes, I am.
I'm going to answer your question if you'll shut up for a minute.
Go ahead.
Right. Prevent has prevented large numbers of people from becoming terrorists, but it does not succeed in every case. And you could not expect it to succeed in every case.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
5 to 3. Before we go back to the calls, don't go away. Chris, Voice of Doom, it is day 11, Adam, isn't it? Day 11 on the Voice of Doom? It is. Day 11. This is it's the longest one we've ever had. I'm slightly surprised. We did give you a bit of a clue yesterday. I'll reiterate that. Well, it's sort of a clue. This is the political mystery voice feature. Here's the voice.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Who is that? Do not call in. There is no prize. But you can message in 87222 if you want to have a crack at this. Here it is again.
Give me hundreds of examples.
The clue we gave you was that this person has been referenced and mentioned in the news in the last week, including on this show. The name of this person actually came out of my mouth just shortly before we did the feature about a week ago. 87222. If we get a right answer, we will reveal all on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over for day 12. Here it is again.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Any ideas? We always get some. It's what some of the regular ones we get every day on this. Not Angela Rayner. It's not Hazel Blears. It's not Andrea Leadsom. There's a whole load of names that come up each time. Who is it? Hopefully we can tell you after the 3 o'clock headlines. This is Chris in Epsom on digital ID. Chris, are you ready for the revolution?
Put your tin hat on. I'm going to take you for a ride. So
go for it.
And you won't need the tin hat afterwards.
Can't wait, Chris. Fire away.
This is a way of sliding in complete digital ID. Now, with that comes the fact that they're going to go into bank accounts for benefit cheats. Well, hang on a minute. We've got inspectors that do that chase up people that are dodgily claiming their benefits. I mean, it goes back to Blair and Brown. They moved 1 million people from unemployment benefit to sickness benefit to get the job numbers, to get the figures down. That's what they did. And this has been going on since then. Now, the problem is that if you let them into the bank accounts of people on benefits, all right, that means quite a lot of people, because if you include child benefit, you include tax credits for low-paid jobs. That's a big portion of the population.
Yeah.
And it's not much of a shift for them to go, oh, okay, we're going to do it across everybody. Then you've got the situation that you could have, that Canada had with Trudeau, with the lorry drivers that weren't breaking the law but didn't want to have the vaccine.
True. But he did that without digital ID, of course.
Yeah, he just did it with the bank accounts.
Yeah.
Now, all of it. Then you've got your freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to congregate is all taken away at a stroke. And on top of that, you're going to have Mad Miliband saying, well, we should put a carbon credit on people's ID as well, so they can only have so many flights a year and only buy so much petrol.
Yep.
It's mad. We're going down that road. I mean, that's what the EU want to do with their citizens.
Well, that would be one way to look at it. The other way is that our life gets easier, Chris. What do you reckon?
What? How does it get easier here, for God's sake?
Well, I haven't got to carry that passport. Every time I go on holiday, I'm looking for my passport. I've always put it in some drawer somewhere. I get it eventually. Driving licence, couldn't even tell you where that is at the moment.
Listen, with powerful computers and AI, how long do you think it's going to be before people can do fraudulent driving licences and passports and everything?
Yeah, true. I mean, that's going to be the biggest challenge for the whole kind of artificial intelligence world, isn't it? How the whole area of fraud is going to get a whole load worse before it gets better. Chris, thank you for the warning. That is Chris on digital ID. He senses it is a path to something slightly more disturbing and nefarious. Are you sharing that view? I can get it, because it kind of feels a bit like that. I'm sure it's not, by the way. We'll do some more comments in a moment. Great one from Alison, former police officer. I'll come to that on the other side of the headlines. 0344 499 1000. The main question we threw out at the beginning in response to Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary's woeful response to the Southport stabbings, which was to have two-tier verification when you're buying a knife off the Amazon. Really? Is that as good as it gets? What about some tough talk, Home Secretary? We're asking the question, what is the solution? We can all bicker and shout from the sidelines. What is the solution? And the voice of doom. Whose voice is this?
Give me hundreds of examples.
87222 if you think you know. Can we reveal oil after the headlines?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
At 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Lots to get through here this afternoon. New age verification rules for online knife sales will be introduced after the Southport stabbings. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper calling it a disgrace that the attacker could have bought a knife on Amazon. Well, that may well be a disgrace and clearly not a good look. Not sure it's the answer to knife crime. Goodness me, really? Get a little more robust, a bit more serious maybe, Home Secretary, on this. No one is feeling confident in that kind of woeful response to something like this. We'll have more of your comments, and there are many of them, coming throughout the course of the next hour. Also this afternoon, yesterday we talked about the driving licence going digital. Today the British passport is going to be made available on smartphones from 2027, stored in a new government digital wallet where people can save documents to their phone using a very special government app. Are you quivering? Are you bothered? Or is there nothing to see here? Tinfoil hats at the ready, kids. And the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is poised to lead a Labour rebellion against Rachel Reeves over her backing for a third runway at Heathrow Airport. Yep, it's usually called progress, expansion, good for business, good for commerce, etc. But there's a problem. Net zero. It's going to stamp all over Ed Miliband's big red box. What's likely to be the upshot? We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, 0344 499 1000. It is coming up on 3:05. This one in from Alison, who says, as a former police officer, the need for stop and search powers, that is the easy bit. However, they need to be able to do so without reason and or suspicion, which of course has always been the controversy. You know, you've got to have good reason to stop and search someone, even if you're in a postcode or an area where you know there's loads of kids doing bad stuff. You've still got to have your reasons. The officer needs to be supported by their top brass, and any stop and search complaint should be binned. Starmer needs to stand up and tell the country that, with his backing and support, the police will now be stopping anybody, no matter of their colour or religion. Anyone carrying should be given a 5-year imprisonment, which should be amended depending on the weapon being carried. I would imagine zombie knives would carry a greater sentence under the proposal from Alison. Without all of this, nothing will change, and no officer will be happy to use their powers as it stands. It's a good point. And also, for the benefit of those saying, yeah, what about cops that want to give you a smack when they're patting you down? Well, cops wear body-worn cameras now. There's a CCTV camera, not just on every lamppost and in every shop, on every doorbell. Every individual in the street, anyone witnessing a state, everyone's got a camera. You'd have to be a particularly daft copper to start that kind of caper. So police would be protected as well. That's Alison's view. She's a former cop, knows the terrain well. But we don't hear that from our politicians. We hear two-stage verification. Is that really going to solve the problem? I somehow think not. I'll give you some details in a moment as well about Norman Brennan's GoFundMe page, which he's launching in order to try and get a proper law and order foundation to get to the nitty-gritty, the centre, the hub of where knife crime has gone wrong, and a voice that can advance that cause. Norman would be that voice, but he needs help. I'll tell you where it stands in a moment. And of course the voice of doom just before the news. It's the voice of doom, day 11. We played you this voice.
Give me hundreds of examples.
And we asked a very simple question. Who is that? Does anybody know? Day 11. One of these has never gone on this long. I think the previous record was about 5 or 6 days. Is it Sammy Woodhouse? No. Is it Claire Fox? No. Maggie Oliver? Ed Miliband? No. Natalie Fleet? No. Stella Creasy, it is not. Nor is it Julia Hartley-Brewer. Joe Platt? No. Justine Greening? No. Or Esther McVeigh? Have we got a right answer? No. It rolls over to tomorrow. Day 11 on the programme, about 2:45, or round about 2:45. We'll replay the voice. We have to get a winner. There's a lot depends on this. Remember, there is no prize. So, let's go to this. British citizens will be able to store their passports on smartphones for domestic and potentially international travel by 2027. The digital passport will be part of the government's new app, also storing digital driving licences. Finland has already trialled digital passports, and the EU is exploring similar options. In a moment, we'll speak with James Baker, Campaigns and Advocacy Manager at the Open Rights Group, who's got some issues around privacy. But first, Stephen Webb, Head of Government Reform at the Policy Exchange. On this point, Stephen, good afternoon to you. I mean, there's a simple, I suppose, straightforward answer. It's just the inevitable direction of travel. It's the organic process of technology. What did we think was going to happen once we got smartphones? So you could look at it that way. Of course, the concerns, which I'm sure you're more familiar with me, is that, hang on a second, the government have all my ID. Not a good look.
I think it is something that the public should welcome, that the government has had times where we've actually got quite ahead of, the government got quite ahead of things on IT. There was a time when the MOT and the was being automated, and I remember people were talking about how amazing that was. A few years ago, we had the Tell Me Once for people who'd suffered a bereavement, rather than having to tell dozens of different agencies. But I think in recent years, the feeling is it's slipped behind a little bit. So quite welcome the idea the government's pushing this forward again. I think I understand the concerns about rights, and having worked on technology programs in government myself, the privacy and security is always a big part of them. In reality, compared to many of the private sector companies, the government doesn't have that much data on you, really. If you think of how much financial information do you give them compared to the amount your bank knows about you, the amount, let alone how much your internet service provider knows about you. So while I think this should be taken seriously, I don't think it should be a sort of the be-all and end-all. The main thing is, can the programmes be delivered?
Well, indeed. I mean, that's always the big question when you're asking governments to deliver anything. It's like turning an oil tanker around, of course. So I don't think this is coming in next Tuesday or anything like that. But you're right. I think a lot of the concerns, Stephen, we've had this afternoon hasn't been from people who are specifically worried about a passport or a driving licence. That, on the face of it, is sort of common sense. It makes things much, much easier. It's where it goes next. It's whether, your carbon footprint, will that be registered? Will you be told that, you can only use X amount of petrol a week because of the net zero agenda, and your phone will literally cease to work to make petrol payments because you've exceeded your allowance, that kind of stuff. Can you book a flight because you've overused the amount of air travel you're entitled to? Your vaccine status and things like that's where it starts to get a little bit Aldous Huxley, right?
Yeah, so people can't have it both ways. Either the government is going to, would be an extraordinarily difficult thing to deliver even if they wanted to. So I think I think just getting these basic things right is going to be challenging. And as you say, it's not coming in tomorrow. It's not coming in till 2027. I think there'll need to be a discussion bit by bit about what we want on the app and what we don't. And the government minister has said it's not going to be compulsory, this wallet or this app anyway. So it is a service that people can choose to use or not. The idea of a kind of a Chinese social credit system, that really is, well, I imagine it'll never happen. It will be extraordinarily difficult to do anyway.
But that is the point. I mean, the Chinese have sort of done something similar, and, where the Chinese go, we used to say where the Americans go, we lead. We follow, but, there is a sense that China is going to overtake and become the big boy on the central global stage. And, if they can do it, why can't anybody else do it?
It's a political program. That why would you want to do it? And clearly they have a massive surveillance requirement for it, and they put enormous amounts of resources into it. I don't think there's any suggestion that anyone in government is interested in that. There's been a big government report that's been talking about just how government is struggling to get the right people in, get enough people in to pay them enough. Government is really struggling to deliver the technology programs it has on its plate at the moment. So in many ways, I think we're already too ambitious in what we try to do. Again, from my experience in government, smaller, simpler, quicker, fail fast, move on is the way to go. And some enormous program of a sort of social credit system, I think, would collapse immediately if anyone even tried it.
So why do they need this system at all then? Why would they need a government wallet that has your passport and if it's optional, that's one thing, but you can see how it would very quickly become non-optional. And I don't mean that in a conspiratorial fashion, just from the admin side of it. We don't make paper passports anymore. We just send it to your phone. You can imagine that happening.
That's not what ministers have said. And, obviously there are a number of people who just don't have smartphones even now, and it's unless you were actually to legislate to force them to have them. I think genuinely the government believes that there's going to be an appetite for this. People will want it, and I think they're probably right, frankly. So I think most of the population will be quite keen to have it. It's one fewer thing to sort of to lose or to keep hold of. It'd be a long time before you then needed to worry about if you wanted to extend it to everyone. Yeah. You know, we don't have an ID system. It's not a requirement to have a driving license. It's not a requirement to have a passport at all.
At the moment, that's very true. Yeah, you don't have to drive and you don't have to travel, I guess, if you look at it that way. Listen, Stephen, thank you for your time. He's head of government reform at the Policy Exchange. Nothing to see here. Let's talk to James Baker, campaign and advocacy manager at the Open Rights Group. Good afternoon to you, James.
Good afternoon. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, I don't know, advocacy. I nearly did it again. I, for some reason, stumbled on that one. Listen, I mean, you heard what Stephen said there. I'm sure you've heard all those arguments before, but, you know, he was suggesting, look, you know, don't worry about your tinfoil hat. Governments aren't even that good, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what I'd say about this is it depends how you implement these things, right? The devil is in the detail. It is very possible to create a kind of privacy-friendly app that literally just shows a passport or driver's license and doesn't record any of that information if you use it. So if the government are going to go down that route and they're going to create a privacy-friendly app and device and a secure way of doing it, then we'd have far less concerns about that. I think what the danger is you see of these schemes is it starts off with one intention, and before you know it, someone else in government is proposing that the scheme could be used for something else, and then someone says, oh, hey, actually, wouldn't it be a great idea if we were able to know when someone proved their ID for preventing crime? And before you know it, as you know, when you have an app on your phone, that app can collect lots of data, locational data. It can potentially have access to photograph, microphone, camera. So it really depends on the devil in the detail on this, how they design that app.
Yeah, and I talked, as you would have heard there, to Stephen about some people's concerns, and they do sound a little bit Orwell. I mentioned Huxley actually, just because I thought I'd mix it up a bit. We always mention Orwell. I thought, well, why should he get all the glory when it comes to dystopian possibilities? But nonetheless, there is that concern that, you know, we know that governments can be a bit funny. Trudeau in Canada was a bit iffy with people who didn't want to have a vaccine. So there is a genuine understanding that people would ask the question.
You do see the stuff creeping in. I've got a banking app and it now tells me how much CO2 I'm using, supposedly based on my credit card transactions. Wow. You know, I never asked for that. It's a common high street app and it's just started kind of giving me this information supposedly on how much CO2 I'm using. So there's always that risk of function creep, which is born out of good intention. And it may start off voluntarily, but you see this with, you know, cash at the moment. Oh, you can use your card, it's easier. Before you know it, you go into a shop and you see a sign saying we don't take cash anymore and you can't pay for cash. So down the line, is it going to be the case that certain businesses say, oh, no, we only accept this digital app? Or if you make it easier to use it, will more companies start requiring you to show your ID to do things if it becomes easier? So there are some risks around this. Yeah, you've just reminded me, actually, when I look up a train journey, I get a couple of options of the train journey, you know, the longer train or the faster train, the shorter or the faster, whatever. And they put a little carbon thing on there as well. If you take this journey, you'll use this amount of energy, and if you take that journey, it's like, it's kind of slightly, but I don't know how anybody actually reckons their train journey based on their carbon footprint. But something's going on there, it seems. Yeah. Well, what the government needs to do is set out, if this is just about showing your passport and a digital version of your ID, set it out with really strong privacy things, involve organisations like ours, which, you know, we have expertise on privacy. We can help you make a privacy-friendly app that just does what it says on the tin. Don't get bogged down in this function creep, mission creep, try and make it an all singing, all dancing app to do everything. Because if you go down that route, before you know it, it will spiral, and it will become this kind of general government app which we're all forced to have and invades our personal privacy. Yeah.
I mean, I think Gordon Brown started, was it the Gateway system or whatever it was called, that was the sort of internet version of, you know, all your stuff is here, so your tax number, whether you're inquiring about that, it's all in one place. Is this a sort of digital version of that?
I mean, these things don't happen in a vacuum, right? So there's the Tony Blair Institute that is advocating for more of this kind of AI state, everything's going to be done digitally, and people rightly kind of read their stuff and they go, hang on, where's this going? There are countries in the world that have abused this stuff. We don't want, you know, our country as a democracy to kind of go down that route, so they have concerns about it. And as I said, you know, the government's serious about doing this in a privacy-friendly way. There are ways that can be done, but keeps it just a digital passport. or a digital version of your driver's license. They could look at other things such as integrating it with, Apple or Google wallets. Yeah. If you're going to be forced to download a government app, then what data is that app collecting about you? That's the question. If the answer is none, okay, fine. If the answer is a lot, hang on, that's a big privacy concern.
Spot on. Great to have you on, James. Thank you for your time. James Baker, Campaigns and Advocacy Manager at the Open Rights Group. Thank you to him. Over to you on this one. Vinny says there's, about 10 people live in Finland. You know what I mean? Why do they use Finland or Iceland as examples when the population is a couple of million? I think he's talking about digital ID in that respect, where other countries have certainly embraced it. The Tony Blair thing is interesting. Blair is... very similar. There's a kind of left meets right thing in this, because there's lots of people on the right who also quite like the idea of the digital ID wallet, but the digital ID wallet with bells on. I think Tony Blair, if he was sitting here, would probably say, oh no, I want it to go further. I want it to have your medical details on it. I want it to have your details of travel. Yeah, and if you're using a silly amount of air travel, then I want you to know that that's not responsible. I don't think he would hide away from all of that. He would then argue that immigration and issues around people moving around the planet become easier to follow and maintain when you get to that stage. I believe he believes it. I don't think he's part of the lizard people. I think there's a sort of certain odd left-wing ideology that absolutely loves a spreadsheet. They cannot get out of bed in the morning unless there's a database involved in the first conversation. All of that collating everybody's data all in the same place. It makes them sleep better. It gives them a nice warm feeling in the pit of their belly. I don't think those people advocate that because they're part of some kind of global conspiratorial idea that's going to control the people and stop you doing whatever and imprison you in 15-minute cities. I know that's a interesting conversation and some people feel very passionate about it. I don't buy into that. I think their endeavours are based on this evangelical idea that databasing everything is the best way forward. But it spectacularly forgets, a bit like saying, well, you might as well stick a CCTV camera inside of your front door. Forget outside on your doorbell, stick it inside. You've got nothing to hide, what's the problem? And don't worry, it's got an AI thing that will blur out any bit like when you jump out the shower. So your little bits and pieces won't be spotted on the camera. Why not do that then if you've got nothing? There is such a thing as privacy. There is such a thing as examining and authenticating our relationship with the state, the citizens' relationship with the state. If I want to fly off somewhere, if I want to do something, fill up a car, buy a second car, build a new home, buy a second home, rent one out, if I want to do that, why am I being stopped because of some half-baked idea that the planet is about to die by Ed Miliband? Is Ed Miliband going to stop that progress and database me because it suits his life? So you've got people like that who love it and dine out on it, and they almost dismiss the privacy thing, when the privacy thing, I think you could reasonably argue, is top of the tree, is fundamental. It's absolutely priority number one, that an individual has their privacy from the state. Because, it might not be Starmer, it might not be Badenoch or Ed Davey or even Nigel Farage. You don't want some clown down the line 20 years ago, well, I mean, the Chinese have got great results on criminal activity just through the app. How do you do that? Well, essentially, you survey people all day long and don't let them out of a ringed housing estate. Oh, right, OK, so it could work. Yeah, what's in the ringed housing estate? Oh, everything's in there, don't worry. You've got your shops and you've got your recreational stuff. No, you'll be fine. No one's going to jail. You can see the arguments, and it's so vital you have those arguments to retain fundamental freedoms and basic. That really is an example of a human right. I'd like to think the human rights people would be onto that as well. Don't hold your breath. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. Just gone 3:20. This is Talk.
I'm not going to be spoken down to like some kind of child, OK? I don't know who you think you are. Just because you're a lord does not give you the ability to lord it over the rest of the public, OK? So talk to me as an equal, or else you can get lost.
I thought you were a journalist.
I am a journalist. Yes, I am.
I'm going to answer your question if you'll shut up for a minute.
Go ahead.
Right. Prevent has prevented large numbers of people from becoming terrorists, but it does not succeed in every case. And you could not expect it to succeed in every case.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
One in from Simon, who says, Ian, the UK social credit system will essentially end up being like a Tesco club card, whereby they force you to get a club card to make sure stuff is cheaper, says Simon, who's in Spain. Yeah, that's where I'd rather be right now. Matt says, very handy to have it all in an e-wallet. The government already has our driving licence and passport. I would worry about fraud and access to the details. Well, that's clearly going to be key, isn't it, to getting this thing up and running. Brad, in Chiswick, says, if this becomes mandatory, then I'll happily wait for the government to provide us with a smartphone, because I won't be using my phone for government business. Also, on the job benefits thing, why doesn't the job centre staff get commission for anyone they get back to work? Money talks, as they say. It's a good point. And this one from Brian. Your driving licence is already online via the government website to check points or whatever category you can drive. Also, your passport is already online, as when filing official stuff in, you'll be asked if you want to use your passport. That's true, but you have to take a picture of it, don't you? And then you get a reflection as in the... I had this recently. When you take the picture and go, oh, that's a good picture, that's amazing. I could enter that into a photography competition, then somebody goes, the light of your camera has just hit one of the numbers, so we can't see the last. So you do it again. Is it easier to have it in your phone? Let's go to Ray, who's in Colchester. Back to our key issue here this afternoon on that issue of knife crime. What have you got for us, Ray?
Yeah, hi, by the way. Yeah, basically, I think it's much deeper than just knife crime. We have a tendency to look at all these things in isolation and, as the government always does, reach for an off-the-shelf idea that gets a headline but actually achieves absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. The reality is, for the last 30, 40 years, as a society, we have demonised boys and men. We have basically told them that their normal masculinity is now toxic. We have given them basically no real hope for futures and that. In whatever education they're discriminated against at pretty well every level now. In the past, we recognised that the most dangerous people in the world were young men with no hope. And that's why we used to have keep them employed, put them in the army and all the rest of it. What we've now done is not only created a toxic environment where they are viewed by the powers that be as being toxic, we've also then given them the power of social media, which reinforces all of these images based on what they're actually looking at. And then we are surprised at what we're getting. This has been a long time coming. The biggest killer now of young men is suicide. Do you not think these things are all related? So the idea that somehow, we're going to put... the other week I actually got age checked for buying a butter knife. This is how ridiculous this ends without addressing the risk.
But is it possible, though, Ray, because I hear what you say, but could there be more than one thing going on here? Because, you know, the sort of removal or the criminal offence of being masculine, as it almost feels, you know, of all of that, and, you know, everything being written on toxic masculinity, blah, blah, blah. Could there be that? But also, the gang culture thing, would that not be seen as sort of separate to that? That's a different societal problem.
What we used to give young men was a bigger gang. It used to be called the Army. Used to be called the Navy, Air Force, all of these other structures that we used to have, we basically whittled away to pretty well nothing. We now have an army you can fit in Wembley Stadium, 70,000 odd active members. So we've taken away those power structures that certainly boys and men crave. We've demonised every aspect of them, your toxic masculinity, whatever rubbish they come up with nowadays. And then we've given them no real options in life. But basically, most people are not academic. Most people are manual. We've taken away. There's none of those manual jobs. We basically have an education system that's creating for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And then we put them out in the world, and they look around and find them at a time when you're a teenager, when you're most vulnerable to, you feel uncomfortable yourself and all the rest of it. And what are we offering them as a society? We're offering them absolutely nothing. And so a gang that comes along and says, you know what, look at the power you can have with us. Look at the car, look at the girls, look at all those things.
Yeah, you can have it all, but you've got to do this first.
Yeah, but now we no longer give that. So don't be surprised when the most, there was a reason why society's learned that you have to control young men. Powerful, there is nothing more dangerous than an angry young man with no hope. They're really...
So it's a hope thing. I think you've probably got right into the depths of this, Ray, and there's arguably more that could be said on it, and we could write papers on this thing and probably give lectures around the world. Ray, thank you. I would never discount. In fact, I would embrace what Ray said as a crucial component to that argument about young men and their purpose and their direction. One of the really telling things I thought he said there is, as someone who's got two kids in school, a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old now, that even itself sounds a bit weird, 11-year-old. The idea that the education system isn't fit for it's teaching stuff that is, we're way out of date, this one-size-fits-all thing. Of all the things that change in society, often beyond recognition, lots of systems and stuff we do as people, the way we work from home would be, I suppose, a reasonable sort of analogy. People used to go to work. Now half the people in the country do it from home. And yet throughout all of the changes and all the evolutions in different areas, whether it's about, the individual or about the population or about government ideas and policies, the one thing that's never really changed is the one-size-fits-all education system. And the more you think about it, and I know we debate this stuff incessantly in social media and, parent groups on WhatsApp and God knows what else, it kind of does magnify it somewhat. I've never felt more strongly that our education system is absolutely flawed. Those working within it, most have the best intentions. There's great teachers out there. There's some hopeless ones as well. But it seems extraordinary. So I wonder if we'll go back to the old days where kids used to leave school at 14. Because there are good arguments that, a kid gets to 14 and after that, a certain group of kids who've got loads of abilities beyond or in other areas that aren't academic aren't going to learn anything in the next, 4 years. There's nothing to learn. There's going to be no benefit in doing that. Now, of course, you create a massive problem because you'd have huge unemployment. But you can see notionally the argument, but certainly the idea of one size fits all. The more you think about it, it's not just wrong, it's obscene that we cram these kind of syllabuses. Syllabi? Come on, Adam, you're a bright guy. Syllabuses? I think it's syllabuses. Syllabi. Syllabs. Syllabion. Syllabier. Nous syllabions. All of that, whatever it is, we cram it all into one kind of thing. And you go to any school in the land, and everyone is sort of more or less teaching the same thing. Apparently, I've just been told that it can be syllabuses or syllabi. I can honestly say I've never heard anybody say either, but I'm going to say syllabi. So put those syllabi in the bin, frankly, because we need to rethink. We could do a whole phone-in on that and the damage, the monumental damage that is created to some children. Some kids will love it, embrace it, fly by, do really well. And, I'm talking to other parents, their kids are flying, they're clearly destined for amazing achievement. My little lad doing very well. He's hit all of his targets and all his marks and all the rest of it. Not a great fan of school, though. He just doesn't feel it. And, I don't know how you're meant to force that. He likes it, just doesn't love it. And that's like many other kids. That's not necessarily the question we're asking there. But in terms of what would be best, you can't have 2 million different syllabi. but you can give it a go. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is worth mentioning, by the way, that we spoke to Norman Brennan, the Law and Order campaigner, former cop of 30 years. He spent his time since leaving the police force. Well, while he was there as well, he was the victim of a stabbing too, and pretty horrific. Lucky to have survived and all the rest of it. But since then, he's spent most of his time advocating and trying to get more action on knife crime. And whilst he recognises there's lots of really good people doing their best, it's never really getting the traction it needs. The voices are not loud enough. The voices are not changing policy. And he wants to make sure he's in a position where he can carry on doing that work. I mean, I've interviewed him for 20 odd years, and he's made some brilliant points and every time he's on with us, nobody really disagrees with him. It's just talking common sense. But you don't hear politicians talk like that, because politicians are woeful and usually a bit rubbish, and particularly our recent lot, just hopeless. You know, Yvette Cooper and knife crime. Really? That was your response to Southport? A 2-tier verification system on Amazon? Oh, man alive, help us. Norman wants to put together something more robust. He's got a crowdfunder going. It's a GoFundMe page. He wants to make sure he can put together, as one of Britain's leading knife crime campaigners for over 30 years, a small group of people. It might be him and one other, whoever it happens to be, but certainly he wants to make sure that he continues this work and does it in the best possible way and the loudest possible way. When we spoke to Norman a couple of hours ago, he raised £2,000. As we sit here now, he's raised £5,500 just in about 90 minutes. So thank you to everybody who donated to that, and you'll be able to follow the progress of how this money is spent and what happens, etc. Norman is a supremely trustworthy man. He's so passionate. I don't know anybody who is. He mentioned Maggie Oliver. Maggie Oliver, of course, who has talked about grooming gangs, former cop as well, also a former police officer, so she knows where the system leaks and where the problems are. Norman is the same with knife crime. If you want to donate on his GoFundMe page, then there is a link on my Twitter feed. You can follow me on Twitter at Ian Collins UK. That's at Ian Collins UK. Let's get it to 6,000 quid, you know, and above. Let's keep it going. But it would be great to see that at Ian Collins UK. There is a link there. It's the last thing I posted over there on Twitter or X, and you can make a donation and help Norman and the good work that he wants to continue. Now, Rachel Reeves faces a Labour rebellion over her support for a third Heathrow runway. Good old Rach. She's thinking progress. She's thinking, well, natural order of events. She's thinking business. However, she's got opposition growing. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, he's warning legal action over net zero concerns. The man's obsessed with it. Meanwhile, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband has also said that told Donald Trump that net zero is unstoppable, despite Mr. Trump's pledge to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Let's speak with Will Jones, editor over there at the Daily Sceptic. Good afternoon to you, Will.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. Good to be here.
And nice to have you with us. I mean, there's some extraordinary arguments going on here. I think this is the big one, really. Rachel Reeves, who might well get backed by the Prime Minister. If this happens and the third runway goes ahead, I can't really see any reason why it shouldn't, and they've debated it for years, of course. If it does, then one would assume Labour's net zero evangelism is dead and buried.
Yes, it's incredible, isn't it? We're really seeing the first major split here, I think, of the Labour government in power for about 6 months now. And here we have Keir Starmer today refused to back Rachel Reeves, didn't say anything, refused to say one way or the other. Starmer previously has been emphatically against Heathrow expansion, voted against it, backed the legal action against it, which was momentarily successful in the Court of Appeal, although did get overruled. And he hasn't backed her yet. But as Rachel Reeves told Davos this week, that growth is the number one priority, she says, for the Labour government. Number one, trumping, she says, everything else, implying also net zero. This is the big debate, the big conflict within the government, and Rachel Reeves is staking out a clear route and putting growth first. You have to think that her political survival depends on this, with things in the economy going so badly for her. So it's little wonder that she's taking this route. But there's an obvious conflict here with all the Greenies in her party, with Ed Miliband, of course, but with Starmer himself. And so which way is he going to go? That's what we're all waiting to see. Yeah. And which way is the government going to jump on this key issue?
Boris Johnson, of course, found himself in this position. I think as Mayor of London, he was very against the runway. And then in government, or certainly as an MP, he was against it. Maybe it was a Henley issue. And then as Foreign Secretary, I think he legged it to another country when the vote was happening or something like that. I mean, politicians can say one thing and do another. Sadiq Khan, he's got his own audience down there in the capital city. But Ed Miliband and Keir Starmer are going to be interesting, particularly the Prime Minister, of course, because, you know, will he be seen as the Prime Minister that stood in the way of growth?
Well, that's it. He's got little choice now, and we've already seen, although Ed Miliband might be very, very strong, very zealous, swivel-eyed, you might say, about net zero, clearly this net zero agenda is going to come into major conflict with growth. That's becoming clearer and clearer by the day. That's really, really clear now, going to be brought into extreme focus by Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. And we're going to see a real contrast now with America over the coming years, with America really going for oil and gas-driven growth, much like, of course, China is and has never stopped doing, building 1 or 2 coal power plants every single week. So we're really going to see that contrast now. And Labour just can't, the Labour government, they're starting to realise, and Starmer's surely starting to realise, that for all their green zealotry, they can't afford to be left behind, because that will, if there's one thing that will completely doom them, they're already pretty doomed, as we know, at the ballot box in 4 years' time. But if there's one thing that really will doom them, is if the economy is in a terrible state and people look at America and other countries and think, wow, we really have been screwed over by our leaders here.
Yeah, it's going to absolutely destroy the very heart of the government's journey, isn't it? I mean, as we're saying it and as we're talking about it here, Will, it's becoming more and more apparent that whatever way Keir Starmer goes, he's stuffed. Because if he goes for the runway thing, then that's going to divide. I mean, would Ed Miliband resign if he did that? One would have to assume, bearing in mind how honest Ed likes to not just talk about this but preach about it, even telling, you know, the President of the United States that, you know, think again, Donald, because, you know, net zero's here to stay. I did hear that when we tried to get a comment from Donald Trump on Ed Miliband's intervention, that he couldn't come to the phone because he was crying his eyes out in the corner of the Oval Office, if there is a corner in the Oval Office. I'm sure he's really disturbed by Ed Miliband and what he had to say. It'll make no difference. But this could be absolutely huge for Labour as a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. You do have to wonder how long Ed Miliband can stay in his job if he can't make some accommodation with the realities, the hard realities, and the new world that's coming. This is not 2009 anymore. It's not even 2016. It's now 2025. Donald Trump is in power. The net zero banking agreements, consortia are collapsing. Major banks, American banks especially, have withdrawn from those. The Paris Climate Accord is collapsing. People are waking up to the fact that China has never really been on board with this, and so you have to wonder how long can Ed Miliband survive if he can't make some serious accommodations. But unfortunately, he just comes across as completely delusional a lot of the time. He's one of the most hardline green zealots out there, and of course he's in charge of energy policy, and that's just not going to be consistent with this drive for growth, and as Rachel Reeves put it, as that being their number one mission. So something's going to have to give.
100%. Listen, thank you, Will. Great to have you on with us. Will Jones is the editor of The Daily Sceptic. I know there's going to be some announcing tomorrow about building in Britain. The Prime Minister, I would imagine, will be heading up another one of those press conferences. We're going to build or whatever, probably wind farms. I don't know. We'll wait and watch with interest on that one. But this could be an absolute decisive moment in the short time the government have been in. If Rachel Reeves backs the third runway and Keir Starmer doesn't back her, then does she go? He's not going to go. Or does he back her? Because if he does back her, that changes absolutely everything about Labour's direction of travel. Absolutely everything will change. Ed Miliband could not remain in office. Of course, what they try to do with these announcements that have an environmental impact is offset them by saying, you you have to, for every contractor or anyone involved, or Heathrow or airlines or whoever, will have to make a donation to the Amazonian Parrot Fund or something like that, an environmental cause that plant some trees in Bromley. That should do it, so that the EasyJet boys can keep landing those pesky jets. But don't worry, because we built a forest in Chislehurst. That's kind of how the way I think it might work. It's going to be fascinating to see this happen. But I can only see a big divide and a bigger row, regardless of which way it ends. This comes in from Gina on digital ID. On the subject of those digital passports, here's an issue that I've never heard addressed. 15 years ago, after my uncle's death, I cleared his house out and knew exactly what bank accounts he had, who he had accounts with, such as utilities, what pensions he had, and even the family photo album and people who he knew in his address book. This year I did the same for my son, who was obviously more online. There was absolutely nothing. Everything such as accounts and all the other information is online, all password protected. Absolutely right. That's true. There's going to end up being, I think on Apple you can nominate somebody to be your kind of password buddy in the event. Because lots of people wasn't there an argument about somebody who died who'd spent like 2,000 quid on Apple Music, and the family going, hang on, it's like, we want the music back because he owns that. And the argument was, well, he doesn't own it, never paid to own it, paid to play it. And he's not around anymore, so wasn't entitled to it. But I think the idea is that it goes bigger than that, that you would be able to get into somebody's phone. This one from Paul in 5, digital ID. We live in a country where every Indigenous citizen requires multiple forms of ID in order to live a normal life, and at the same time we have hundreds of thousands of non-British who have entered our country with absolutely no idea whatsoever and whose true identities we may never know. But guess what? They all live completely normal lives as well, apparently, says Paul. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you in a couple of moments. We'll also talk to Jeremy Kyle. He's here for Drive after the news at 4, but he'll give us fuller details of what's going on the big show in just a few moments' time. Coming up on 10 to 4, this is Talk.
Lord Carlisle was removed from the independent review of Prevent back in 2019 because of concerns over his impartiality. Interestingly, he does rather seem to have changed his tune.
Does he?
Since last September, when he said, I think we should get out more information if we possibly can. We've learned from these events when someone is arrested, the police probably need to tell the media who's been arrested and what their background is. So perhaps Lord Carlisle should come back on the programme and explain why he's changed his tune.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Gary says, whilst we risk pushing our economy into the dark ages in a relentless attempt to achieve this net zero, the US, which already contributes 13 times as much towards global warming as the UK, has just gone all in on fossil fuels. So seriously, what is the point in Miliband carrying on down that path? This is the excuse Starmer needs to abandon net zero, with the added bonus of being able to blame Trump for leaving him no choice. That's true, he could go with that, couldn't he? And that would be fine. That would work for him. But it's not, you know, the CO2 thing doesn't go, it's not like a lot of hovering bees that just go to different countries. You either do it globally or really not at all. And if you were talking about, I don't know, if Luxembourg had voted in a politician that didn't go a bundle on net zero, that you could go, OK, well, it's Luxembourg. If all the other countries around it are doing their bit, it's fine. This is the United States. The argument that goes slightly against that, and only slightly, it doesn't address the United States, in which Gary is completely correct. But in China, whilst they are chugging out CO2s left, right and centre, they are simultaneously building more wind farms and solar panel farms than anywhere else on planet Earth collectively. So I don't know what they're doing over there. I think they're saying, well, we'll use it up for a bit and then we'll default to the windmills or something like that. Nick is in London. Reference knife crime. Nick, what have you got for us?
Ian.
Good afternoon.
Hope you're well.
Yeah, very well,
hello,
thanks.
Ian. I hope you're well.
Yep.
I laughed at the 17-year-olds not buying knives because legislation's coming in on that. But it's not funny because 17-year-olds also by the Labour government are going to be allowed to vote in general elections. You can't have it both ways.
True.
You ought to trust them, apart from the fact that there's 17-year-olds and two forms of ID is ridiculously simplistic.
Yeah.
It's not about the knives. It's about dealing with people who stick knives in other people.
Well, absolutely. And there's no one out there, is there, that's going to go, well, I was going to be a knife crime maniac, but I've decided not to because of the Amazon two-tier ID thing.
Yes, I know. It's almost reminiscent of the Baldrick idea for finding a German spy in the hospital.
I've got an idea. Yes. Are you a German spy?
I don't know, he said. It really is that silly. And it's knee-jerk. Just apply the laws properly now. We've got plenty of them.
We certainly do have plenty of them, but we don't seem to be able to implement, more robust laws, like, better prison sentences for stronger, longer, more robust prison sentences for the people carrying a knife. I don't get it either, Nick. Thank you. The argument will roll on. Why you would be allowed to walk free out of a police station when you've been caught with a machete, I've got no idea whatsoever. But don't worry, kids, because Yvette Cooper is going to double ID you over there at the Amazon shop.
This is all a pile of rubbish. We've known this for years.
Jeremy
this is
Kyle,
a complete
everybody.
cover-up. It's not about buying a knife at 17. He was 4 days away from being 18. It's about our Prime Minister, as I said yesterday, not coming out and giving information to calm people and to give them knowledge that they've done on many occasions before. 7/7, the Manchester bombings, right? The man that macheted that poor Lee Hart, the soldier in
Lee
London.
Rigby, yes.
Right? All of those things, right? He didn't do it. The media, the social media thing continued to explode. People went on the streets. He used that and said this is far right and put them all in prison.
Yeah.
And he says yesterday it's about prejudicing the trial. What about prejudicing the trial of the people that have been labelled far right who weren't far right? Because if wrote something and went to prison, it's honestly, I used the wrong word.
And you know what? Because a texter did raise that yesterday as well with us, and I thought that's a good point, because most of those people were told to plead guilty. That's why they went to jail.
Of course they were.
By lawyers, plead guilty, that's your best bet. If they'd have pleaded not guilty, then actually a good lawyer could have gone, well, this man can't have a fair trial. The Prime Minister of the land has already told the jury.
And the Prime Minister said that
maniac.
he knew, right? But what we announced yesterday, and I want to keep going back to that, several days later in July, Angela Rayner, his deputy, said the English Defence League could be described as a terror organisation, right? She said that, and she said Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, is stirring up fake news about this being to do with terrorism. She'd have known as the Deputy Prime Minister that it was, because he was found with ricin, he was found with the manual from Al-Qaeda. Really fascinating.
It is absolutely extraordinary.
But not as fascinating as the argument that is about to bring down the government.
Which one?
Well, didn't they tell us from July it was all about growth?
Oh, yes, yeah,
and then Donald Trump arrives in America and says the green agenda's rubbish.
Yeah.
Ed Miliband counters Ed Millipede, he said the wrong word, and he says it's unstoppable, this force, but you've got Reeves and he have already fallen out over the third runway.
The third runway.
So you're trying to create a runway to make us more accessible to get more money, and you've got that green loon Miliband who still thinks he could take on Donald Trump. One of them's got to go.
Yeah. When did... This is another question. Maybe there's a documentary in this. When did Ed Miliband...
Can I front it, please?
Well, I think you should.
Okay.
When did Ed Miliband go green, by the way? I mean, there's never ever a whisper or a mention about his green credentials.
The only way back into the government, wasn't it, for the man who ended his career in disgrace?
I think that's what it was. He was looking at a new way. What can I do? Oh, I know, that green thing's quite big at the moment.
And did you see the stuff in the London Assembly with Sadiq Khan? Susan Hall stood against him as the Tory thing. She said, how many grooming gangs are in London? He said, I don't understand the question. He was goading her to say it was Muslim so he could accuse her of being racist, as he did when he was on the... he won't accept it at all.
He didn't understand the question.
And all the Southport thing, still not an inquiry into rape gangs.
I mean,
The
you cannot
duplicity
make
of this
this up.
government is
And
extraordinary.
you know, these are the people that got a kind of landslide. I mean, who voted for this?
That tells you how bad that's my favourite suit, by the way.
Is it you like?
My
this
wife
one?
likes you in that one.
She does,
says
doesn't she? Yes.
Yeah,
I
and
often-
out of it.
I keep most of it on.
Really? I don't wish to know. She says it brings out the blue in your eyes.
Is that what she said?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
she
very
likes a bit of blue. Bit of blue.
That's
for the
very
lads.
sweet of her.
How are you? Has everything gone all right with the show? Has Adam smiled a lot?
Adam has been like hysterical today.
Why?
It's been, I don't know, just been running around and not
Ryan
stopped,
doesn't run.
Ryan doesn't
lopes.
Ryan doesn't run. But
Ryan's
Ryan-
very sad today because Watford got beaten last night. He's not happy about that.
I didn't. I forgot to talk to him about that. Did Watford get a beating?
Yeah, they did.
A proper pounding.
He got a beating as well, but that's another story altogether.
How's West Ham doing?